These dark patches on Greenland's ice sheet aren't just any old stains. Every summer, the ice, which is usually bright white, turns murky gray in certain areas. This so-called dark zone was a huge mystery for a long time, until some studies discovered that this weird transformation was connected to the odd appearance of red, green, and brown-colored algae. The scariest part is that this algae bloom keeps growing. The dark zone is getting darker, and terrifying microbes might start appearing. Now, the rest of the world should be concerned. The Greenland ice sheet is like a massive ice blanket that covers around 80% of the island. It's so thick that it holds about 8% of the world's freshwater ice. For most of the year, the ice looks like a giant untouched white sheet stretching over the land. But when summer rolls around and temperatures start to rise, things begin to change. The ice melts, revealing rocky areas along the coast. And as you move further inland, that once smooth white ice becomes darker. This is the dark zone, and it covers an area of around 248 miles in length and 62 miles at its widest point. This weird phenomenon happens basically for two reasons. The first one is black carbon. Just like dust that builds up on your bookshelf, the ice in Greenland has the same issue. The wind carries a mix of dust and soot to this icy area. But unlike your bookshelf, you can't just wipe it off with a cloth. In Greenland's case, this dirty mix settles on the ice and sticks around for thousands of years. So, the dark zone is basically covered in a fine layer of dust that's built up over time. Back in 2014, researchers analyzed this dirty mix and found that the darker ice areas were filled with black carbon. This black carbon didn't just appear out of thin air. Well, actually, it sorta did. Scientists believe it mostly comes from smoke produced by wildfires in northern Canada and Alaska somewhere in the past. As you might guess, black carbon is black, which is why it makes the ice look darker. Now, the second big reason for the Greenland ice sheet's summer makeover has to do with those algae we mentioned earlier. We're mostly talking about two types of it, the Ancylonema alaskana and the Ancylonema nordenskjoldii. Both of them love cold water regions. During winter, they stay in a dormant state deep within the ice. But when spring comes, they start to slowly migrate to the surface. By the time summer hits, they're ready to bloom and soak up nearly 24 hours of sunlight each day for photosynthesis and growth. Normally, these algae are green, but when exposed to sunlight, they turn brown as a natural way to protect themselves from harmful ultraviolet rays. And this color change is also what makes the ice in Greenland look darker. So far, this has been normal behavior. What's really alarming is that these algae blooms are getting bigger and bigger every year. This happens because they thrive on phosphorus, a nutrient that's plentiful out there and comes from a mineral called hydroxylapatite. This mineral is found in a type of rock that breaks down into tiny dust particles, which are then blown across the ice by the wind. As the climate gets warmer, the rocks dry out more, and stronger winds carry more dust. More dust means more phosphorus, leading to more algae growth. See? It is a cycle, and it keeps getting worse every year. Studying this is crucial to understanding why the dark zone keeps getting bigger. From the year 2000 to 2012, its size increased by 12%. But you might be wondering, why should we care? After all, it's just ice getting darker, right? Well, not exactly. Think about how you can't stand wearing black clothes on a hot, sunny day. They soak up the heat and make you feel even hotter. That's because darker surfaces absorb more sunlight. The same thing happens to ice. Together, dust, black carbon, and algae blooms are responsible for about 70% of the variability in albedo on the Greenland ice sheet. Albedo is just a fancy word for how reflective a surface is. If you take two surfaces, one white and shiny and the other dark and rough, the white one will reflect a lot of light and heat, giving it a high albedo. The dark one, on the other hand, will absorb more light and heat, so it has a low albedo. During the summer, the Greenland ice sheet experiences a reduction in albedo. This means the ice absorbs more sunlight, and when ice absorbs more sunlight, it melts faster than it should. This is why understanding what's happening in the dark zone is so important. It helps predict how quickly the Greenland ice sheet is melting and how it can affect the rest of the world. Greenland's ice sheet is the second largest in the world, covering an area about the size of all the land in the United States east of the Mississippi River. And its huge mass of ice averages a thickness of 1.4 miles. Unfortunately, the ice loss has skyrocketed. Back in the 1990s, Greenland was losing about 25 billion tons of ice per year. Now, it's losing around 234 billion tons per year. That's nearly 10 times more ice melting away each year. According to NASA, if all of Greenland's ice sheet were to melt, it would increase global sea levels by about 24 feet. That could be catastrophic for coastal countries and cities around the world. The Netherlands could be submerged, the Bahamas could be almost completely wiped out, and many of the Philippines Islands would be at risk of disappearing. All of this may seem like a distant reality, and it is true that most scientists believe it would take several hundred or even thousands of years for the ice sheet to melt completely. But it is important to know that Greenland didn't always have this thick layer of ice. Very recently, researchers took a close look at some sediment from the bottom of a 2-mile deep ice core extracted from the center of Greenland. They found that the soil had traces of willow wood, insect parts, fungi, and even poppy seeds. So these fossils are the first direct evidence that Greenland's ice sheet melted away in the recent geological past, around 400,000 years ago. At that time, Greenland was home to a green tundra landscape with insects and plants. This discovery is both fascinating and scary because it shows that the ice sheet collapsed before and might be more fragile than scientists originally thought. There is another concern too. A recent research collected meltwater from different spots on the Greenland ice sheet and found that the water samples were packed with hundreds and thousands of microbes. The concern is that they could be released into the ocean in the future. And some studies already suggest that areas near where a lot of glacial meltwater flows have a higher risk of viruses jumping to new hosts, like from animals to humans. Even though experts believe the chance of a doomsday virus coming from the glaciers is very small, it's still not zero. The truth is, we don't know much about the thousands of microbial species living on the surface of the ice, and there is simply not enough data to fully understand how dangerous these organisms might be. All of this might sound concerning, but we shouldn't panic just yet. There's still a lot we don't understand about what is darkening the Greenland ice sheet. We still need more detailed measurements of the relative abundance of dust, algae, and black carbon, as well as a better understanding of how these potentially dangerous microbes could affect our lives. The more we learn, the better we can predict what's going to happen and how we can prepare for it. Strange and amazing items are discovered often, but figuring out what our ancestors were up to is pretty tough. Especially when all you have are just some rusty cups and cave drawings. It's no surprise that even the experts in lab coats sometimes make mistakes. But it's not just about dusty plates and huge stones. Sometimes there's even humans with large heads. So grab your digging tools and let's travel back to ancient times to explore incredible societies that even scientists can't fully explain. Sardinia may look idyllic now, but I'm not gonna lie, I wouldn't fancy visiting it 3,000 years ago. Rumor has it, terrible giants roamed around this island back then. People even talk about finding human skeletons over 13 feet tall there, although nobody's ever shown anything to prove it. But the stories will make you wonder because some weird stuff has definitely happened. In 1974, over 5,000 pieces of broken stone artifacts were found in a part of the island called Monte Prama, but instead of being displayed in a museum, they were locked up in an underground vault for about 30 years. Sounds a bit suspicious, doesn't it? When they were finally displaced in 2005, scientists put the pieces together to find statues of 38 giant men standing 8 feet tall. Not quite as tall as the legendary skeletons, but still pretty huge. It's thought these statues were made by the Nuragic people, who lived on the island a long time ago. Besides giant statues, they also built over 8,000 massive stone buildings. Perhaps Nuragic weren't giants themselves, but they definitely liked their things big. I do too. I like a big number of likes on our videos. That would be pretty great. Thank you if you liked this and subscribed. Now back to the video. You and I are pretty smart, but we might not be the smartest humans ever. Actually, we might not even be the smartest species. Since 1913, some skull fossils found in South Africa have hinted at a possibly smarter contender called boscop man. This human-like species might have lived as recently as 10,000 years ago. Their skull suggests they had really big heads, which means their brains could have been 30% bigger than ours. Wow! Their average IQ could have been around 149, making them among the smartest 0.05% of people today. But if a boscop brainiac was so much smarter, why are they not around and we are? Well, bigger isn't always better, you know. Our brains are a lot bigger than our ape relatives, mainly in the prefrontal cortex. This part helps with high-level tasks like making decisions, remembering things short-term, and being aware of ourselves. The parts of the brain that handle our senses and movements haven't really grown much. So, maybe the boscop spent too much time dwelling on the past rather than doing practical things like hunting. But this is all just guessing. We really don't know what happened to these clever cousins of ours. Some people even argue that boscops weren't any different from us, with the only evidence being parts of skulls. The jungle is huge. Did you know the Amazon rainforest is home to about 30% of all the world's plant and animal species? That's impressive. However, the history of one native species, humans, has long puzzled scientists. The mysterious Kasarabe people lived here for hundreds of years and then vanished around 1400 AD. People thought the Amazon only had a few scattered tribes, but recently we discovered big, unusual shapes in the ground called geoglyphs. These might look like simple shallow ditches, but they're actually the remains of a vast civilization that spread over 5,000 square miles and includes about 450 markings, some as wide as 1,300 feet. That's insane! They likely contained ceremonial buildings and could have hosted up to 1 million people as recently as 550 years ago. Thanks to new technology like LiDAR, which uses a safe laser to map the forest without harming it, we can explore deeper. In 2019, some scans showed miles of raised roads and pathways and even pyramids over 70 feet tall. They found 26 separate settlements, 2 of which were at least 250 acres each. Damn, that's like 330 soccer fields. It's not certain what happened to the Kasarabe people. Maybe European conquistadors drove them out. Maybe the most baffling ancient civilization is one we've never actually found a trace of. Yep, I'm talking about Atlantis, the grand city that supposedly sank into the ocean. The first mentions of Atlantis come from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, who talked about a great city near the Strait of Gibraltar. But for ages, everyone just thought Plato made up Atlantis as a perfect version of his own Athens. So why, about 12,000 years after it supposedly vanished, do we still wonder if it might be real? Well, in the 19th century, U.S. Congressman Ignatius Donnelly wrote a book giving 13 reasons why he thought Atlantis was more than just a myth. Then, in 1965, some folks thought they actually found Atlantis when they discovered the Richat structure, a massive 25-mile-wide dome in Mauritania, Africa. It's so big that you can see the whole thing from space. 2 astronauts flying over the Sahara Desert spotted this giant eye staring back at them and thought they'd made the discovery of a lifetime. Unfortunately, there's no solid evidence linking this structure to Atlantis. It's believed to have formed from volcanic activity about 100 million years ago. But it does look suspicious, doesn't it? Still, we're no closer to knowing the truth. Imagine going back to about 3300 BCE and finding yourself in South Asia. Welcome to the Harappan civilization. These people were way ahead of their time. They had cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, complete with baked brick houses, sophisticated drainage systems, and even public baths. This place might have had over 5 million people, making it one of the densest regions at the time. They also invented a system of standardized weights that was incredibly useful for traders. And trading they did. These people had connections stretching all the way to the Middle East, thanks to their great skills in metallurgy. They even had a form of ancient branding. The seals were used to stamp clay on trade goods. Despite being so advanced with a thriving urban life, there's a whole bunch of mystery shrouding their language and script. We've got bits and pieces of their writing, but no one's deciphered them yet, even with all the technology we have today. We also still don't know how exactly their society worked. It looks like they didn't flaunt their social status as much as other civilizations. No grand palaces or massive monuments. Instead, their largest buildings might have been granaries. They sure were practical. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. Around 1800 BCE, this bustling civilization started to decline, possibly due to shifts in river patterns. As the environment changed, the Harappans packed up, moving towards more hospitable lands. Ever heard of the Minotaur? The beast with a bull's head and a man's body, hunting the bravest travelers in a massive maze. Well, this wasn't just any old tale. It was one of the most popular dramas of the ancient world. And it was inspired by this place, the island of Crete. The Minoans lived here during the Bronze Age. They had stunning palaces, amazing frescoes, and a culture so rich it still fascinates historians to this day. They built places like Knossos, which was so complex with its multi-story buildings and elaborate hallways that it might have inspired the whole labyrinth myth. Their engineering was so ahead of its time that even their drainage systems were more advanced than what many of us have today. Let me know in the comments which of these stories you find the most fascinating, and thanks for watching.
A gruesome discovery took place in Egypt some years ago. You want to hear about it? 16 human hands, carefully buried in 4 eerie pits. They didn't look too much like human hands at first, since they were abnormally large, but they were. Weirdly, there were only right hands. No left hands were in sight. It turned out that it points to the practice of an ancient dark ritual. Old Egyptian art and tales talked of a ceremony where warriors would present the right hand of their adversaries as proof of victory and ask for gold in return. Egyptians believed in the afterlife, so cutting off someone's hand meant you cut off their power eternally. Guaranteeing this type of defeat was interesting to the winning party. Here, the fight was between Egyptians versus Hyksos, who lived in what was once known as Canaan. Egypt has always been the center of some history-changing findings, and some time ago, this papyrus was found. If we stretched it open, it would be just a tad bigger than the height of a skyscraper. The world's tiniest skyscraper, which is located in Wichita Falls, Texas. When humans didn't write on their notes app, they wrote on this thing, made from the medulla of a papyrus plant. Around 2,000 years ago, ancient Egyptians wrote something reminiscent of a book where they describe most of their funerary traditions and their visions of the afterlife. It's considered one of the most important texts from ancient Egypt and is still sold in bookstores to this day. This ancient manuscript was unearthed from a chamber located just south of the Pyramid of Djoser, located in Saqqara. Oh yes, Djoser is the oldest pyramid in Egypt and not the Giza pyramids like most people think. So recently, the site of Saqqara buzzed with excited archaeologists who probably found one of Egypt's oldest complete mummies. They believe that this beautiful and well-preserved mummy was that of a wealthy man. He was discovered in a deep shaft, covered in layers of gold leaves. There are many symbols that show he was an important and wealthy man, like the band he wore on his head, the bracelet on his chest, and the fact that he was embalmed with a tunic, which was reserved for Egypt's finest. The most exciting part of the entire discovery was finding the resting place sealed with mortar, just as the ancient Egyptians had left it 4,300 years ago. Now this may sound weird, but back in 2008, archaeologists discovered a missing pyramid. Now it went missing because it deteriorated over the span of 4,000 years. Today, you can only see its base. It was a pretty important site back in ancient times. It is said that around the area of the pyramid, the ancients hosted a special type of ceremony where high priests would carry mummified remains of sacred bulls. Now here's a fun fact. Ancient Egyptians believed that Apis bulls were earthly incarnations of the city deity of Memphis and was connected to rites of fertility. It wasn't just any Apis bull, though. They needed to be all black, with a single white mark between its horns and a bunch of very specific characteristics. They were selected by the local priests and honored until they passed away. After that, they were mummified and buried in underground galleries. Meanwhile, this missing pyramid sort of disappeared around the 1800s. It was a German archaeologist who first found it in the village of Sahara. He called it the Headless Pyramid when he first found it. But then, years after the official discovery, the desert sand came along and covered the whole thing. There were some excavations between the 19th and 20th centuries, but they weren't too systematic. That's why scientists were so thrilled when they dug an entire pyramid's base after removing the 25-foot mound of sand that was covering it. Oh, and it turns out American archaeologists are excavating a cemetery in Egypt that could contain over 1 million mummified bodies. So far, archaeologists have dug around 1,700 mummies. One of the main differences from other classic Egyptian mummies is that these people weren't kings and pharaohs. They were commoners that most likely lived about 1,500 years ago, when Egypt was controlled by the Roman and Byzantine empires. The name of the cemetery is cool, though, the Way of the Water Buffalo, just in case you want to check it out on your next trip. Other than bulls and buffaloes, ancient Egyptians also liked baboons. Are you seeing a pattern here? In the beginning of the 20th century, archaeologists discovered a site filled with mummified baboons in a place called, guess what? The Valley of Monkeys. An animal wouldn't have been mummified if it wasn't considered important. Certain animals were more important than others, since they were linked to specific deities. Jackals were connected to Anubis, the ancient god of the afterlife, and cats were likened to the female deity Bastet. Baboons were a pretty big deal, since they were believed to be connected to Thoth, the deity of wisdom and advisor to Ra, one of Egypt's supreme deities. The archaeologists who studied these animals weren't too happy. They think these baboons were kept inside and were deprived of sunlight for most of their lives. They had extreme vitamin D deficiencies and they were poorly fed. Maybe Thoth got angry with these baboon keepers. Just a guess. Since there's never a boring day for archaeologists in Egypt, they also found human mummies with golden tongues. Since Egyptians were all about the afterlife, they believed that golden tongues might help a person speak once they pass to the other side. I mean, it's a long shot, but hey, why not? Some of these mummies were placed in wooden coffins with goods, such as necklaces, pottery, golden artifacts in the shape of lotus flowers and scarab beetles, and iPhones. Just kidding. A new temple was also unearthed recently in Egypt. Scientists believe it was dedicated to honor Zeus Cassios. That deity would be a cross between Zeus, the almighty Greek deity of the sky, and Mount Cassios. While digging around the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, archaeologists spotted 2 pink granite columns poking out of the ground, and bingo. They believe these columns represented the temple's front gate and collapsed during an earthquake many years ago. And speaking of deities, there weren't only super serious deities. Recently, scientists unearthed a golden ring in a city south of Cairo. No, Frodo, it's not magical. It was a normal gold ring, but it had the depiction of the deity of fun, officially named Bes. This deity is often described in sacred texts as a happy, chubby dwarf. Today, many tattoos we get are sorta deprived of any sense and are made of aesthetic purposes only. In ancient Egypt, though, women would get tattoos as a token of protection for childbirth. That's what scientists think, at least. Around the Nile region, scientists found some mummies that had well-preserved tattoos, which is a rarity since the skin deteriorates so easily. 2 of these women tattooed their lower backs, and the drawings were simple. They were mostly pictures, including that same chubby dwarf we just talked about, Bess. He also had a side hustle as the protector of women during childbirth. Now, would you believe me if I told you ancient Egyptians invented robots? No? Well, that's because that's not entirely true. Sure, they were astronomers, mathematicians, and engineers, and somehow they also squeezed an eccentric invention into that package. An automated deity some scientists called Hathor. This wooden statue had been in the Metropolitan Museum of Art for years before someone noticed its secret. With the help of an X-ray machine, specialists discovered a mechanical operating system inside it. The pulley-like axis goes from the statue's shoulder to her left leg. When the system rotates, the statue raises and lowers her hand. Hey, pick me! Pick me! I got my hand up here. So, imagine you're 15 and you get bored of playing video games. Instead, to pass the time, you decide to give some attention to an old hobby of yours, tracking down lost Mayan cities. You've heard that some ancient civilizations are said to have built entire cities based on constellations, so you decide to check out whether that was true for the Mayans. You find a book containing all the constellations the Mayan civilization believed to exist. You open good old Google Maps and map every ancient Mayan city discovered to date. You start seeing that this information actually matches. And truly, the biggest ancient Mayan cities correspond to the brightest and biggest stars of the Mayan constellations. Okay, this is getting interesting. You manage to map out over 100 ancient cities when you suddenly notice something strange. There's an area in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico where archaeologists have unearthed 2 Mayan cities. But on the constellation map, there are 3 stars. Could this mean there is a long-lost city waiting to be discovered nearby? You might think this sounds too daydreaming, but the story is actually true. The previous account happened to a Canadian teenager named William Gaddery. The boy is known as a science genius and had even won an award for the constellation theory we presented just now. When he noticed that a 3rd city was missing from the 23rd constellation he was examining, he began to scour the internet for satellite pictures that could help him solve this mystery. He looked into images from NASA, JAXA, a Japan-based satellite company, and Google Earth. These images were still insufficient to answer his questions, so he reached out to a friend inside the Canadian Space Agency. His friend provided him with state-of-the-art satellite imagery that gave him the answer he was looking for. According to the images, there is a large square area right on the border of Mexico and Belize, which looks like the remains of a city. William took the images to a remote sensing expert known as Dr. Armand Larocque from the University of New Brunswick. They studied the images thoroughly and concluded that the area could be housing 30 buildings and even a large pyramid. The scientific and archaeological community went crazy with the 15-year-old's discovery. Could this really be true? Some background. Lost Mayan cities began to be unearthed in the mid-20th century. Since then, ruins from cities such as Tikal, Palenque, and Uxmal have been rediscovered. The Mayans were one of the biggest pre-Columbian civilizations living in the Americas. They began to settle in the area as early as 1500 BCE. Experts believe that, at its height, the Mayan civilization consisted of over 40 cities, with a population of millions of people. That's a crowd. And their cities were pretty interesting. Their civilization spanned over Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, and Belize. They survived mainly on agriculture, so they developed a complex irrigation system in most of their cities. They built a series of ceremonial buildings, pyramids, plazas, and even courts for ball games. The Mayans were keen pyramid builders, but they also developed an advanced astronomical system. With whatever ancient technology they had, they were able to predict the exact location of planets, such as Venus and Mars, and they were able to predict the exact dates of eclipses. That's why the methodology William used to discover this long-lost Mayan city was unusual, but not completely surreal. The Mayans were keen astronomers, so it wouldn't be too strange that they built their major architectural feats in relation to the sky, would it? And they wouldn't be the first ones to be doing so. There is a famous fringe of Egyptology dedicated to studying how the Giza pyramids were built in perfect alignment with the Orion constellation, meaning that each pyramid was purposely built to align with one of the major stars of Orion's belt. According to William, he first had the idea to look at the Mayan constellations because he couldn't understand why the Mayans built their cities where they built them. Most major cities, such as Chichen Itza and Uxmal, aren't near any rivers or significant bodies of water. Instead, they're built on marginal lands and on top of mountains, which confused the 15-year-old. His next thought was that it might have something to do with astronomy. William named the new city he discovered Mouth of Fire, which is also my nickname, and he even won a merit award for his hard work. However, his theory was very much contested inside the archaeological community, and many Mayan experts worked to debunk William's findings. Some archaeologists say that constellation theories are too unscientific. Anthony Aveni, a renowned anthropologist and astronomer, referred to William's methodology as an act of creative imagination. He explained that there is no way to be sure what the Mayan constellations really were. It's all just hypothetical. Another debunking of William's findings came from Mayanist David Stewart, who said that the object identified on the satellite imagery is nothing but an old cornfield. His claim was supported by an expedition that took place near the area in 2021, when the archaeologists present reported there was nothing at all in this area. Still, a 15-year-old boy almost found a long-lost Mayan city, which is pretty exciting if you ask me. Similar techniques as those used by William are actually being used to unearth lost civilizations all over the world. According to space archaeologist Sarah Parquet, satellite imagery has been a key player in discovering ancient cities in Egypt and other places. Sarah herself spends most of her days scouring images for any sign of where there could have been cities long ago. What happens, she says, is that any time you have something buried, it's going to be covered either by vegetation, soil or sand, or some other modern construction on top of it. In order to assess whether there is something hidden under large canopies of vegetation or not, she uses infrared technology, for instance. A major recent discovery in Brazil was done in a similar way. Satellite imagery detected a network of trenches dating back to 200 to 1200 CE. These suggest settlements that could have supported around 60,000 people. But in this case, the satellite imagery did indeed correspond to what was on the ground. Researchers from the University of Florida found several mounds that were accompanied by ditches and geoglyphs. Archaeologists also found remnants of carefully designed walls, centered around plazas, much like the type of construction done by the ancient Mayans. Advances in satellite tech have also shed new light on long-discovered ancient Mayan cities, such as Tikal. Located in the heart of the Guatemalan jungle, Tikal is believed to have been the capital of the ancient Mayan Empire. At its height, it was comparable in importance to cities such as London or New York in today's world. It was composed of a series of complex monuments, many of them believed to have been the resting places of kings and chiefs. Tikal is already known to have been big, but recent discoveries show it could have been even 3 times larger than what scientists originally believed. The main discovery revolves around a fortification on the outskirts of the city, indicating how far the original city stretched. And new discoveries still take place. In 2017, researchers also unearthed new clues regarding the potential causes of the decline of the Mayan civilization. Using data from a Sidon seawall located 62 miles southwest of Tikal, scientists analyzed radiocarbon data from ceramics and archaeological excavations to extract new information about the sudden demise of this great civilization. The information shows that, instead of a sudden collapse, the Mayans most likely collapsed in waves of social instability and political crises. These events are believed to have deteriorated Mayan city centers and began causing the dispersion of the Mayan population. Well, it seems like it's a prime time to uncover ancient ruins. What do you say? Will you give it a try as well?
You are lost deep within the jungle in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. There are strange noises all around you, and to make it worse, the sun is setting. Soon, you'll be alone in the middle of an unknown rainforest. Guess it was a pretty bad idea to come looking for El Dorado on your own, wasn't it? You keep walking as fast as you can when suddenly, wait! What's this you're seeing? It looks like large stairways made out of stone. This definitely doesn't look natural, so you take a picture. Maybe you didn't strike gold, but you might have just found something relevant. Congratulations! You found Akamtun, a long-lost Mayan city, hidden 37 miles into the jungle. The name literally translates to stone column. Stone was probably in at the time, so these guys used a lot of it to build their pyramids, houses, and even ball courts. If you ever thought that Europeans invented ball games, think twice. Mayans love to play ball games for recreational purposes. Akamtun is part of a series of other long-lost Mayan cities that are being discovered with the help of new technology nowadays. We'll talk more about the other ones in a jiffy. Perhaps the biggest surprise of this one is that it was surrounded by wetlands, which is why the city was built on high ground. The city was monumental, covering an area of over 120 acres. That would be as big as 90 football fields right next to each other. Scientists have found proof that Akamtun had pyramids of up to 49 feet high, and that it was likely an important social hub between 250 and 1000 CE. This is definitely a game changer. But lost Mayan cities began to be unearthed in the 19th century. Modern technologies, such as LiDAR imaging, help archaeologists see through dense canopies of the forests. This means that people don't really have to risk getting lost in the tropical jungle like you did at the beginning of this video. LiDAR works sort of like an X-ray. It sends out laser beams that can detect any signs of ruins or ancient constructions. According to space archaeologist Sarah Parchak, satellite imagery has been a key player in discovering ancient cities in South America, Egypt, and other places. Sarah herself spends most of her days scouring images for any signs of where there could have been cities long ago. She says that more often than not, what happens is that ruins are covered by vegetation, soil, or sand, which makes them super tricky to find. But thanks to these awesome tools, scientists also made the huge discovery of ancient Mayan causeways, which spread throughout old Mayan territories. I mean, take a look at these roadways. You'd expect to see ruins like this in places such as Portugal, England, or the United States. I'm talking about 130 feet wide roads painted white to help travelers journey through the nighttime. Scientists recently unearthed a 110-mile network of roads such as these, and they think this dates back to before the first registered Mayan highways we've known so far. These roadways, which sometimes ran over the swampy ground and were even elevated at times, are being called the world's first superhighways. Even if there is no registry of animal-powered vehicles, it's believed that the Maya used them to travel around a network of possible 964 settlements. They were built like a huge spiderweb, and from what archaeologists have gathered, this huge system of roads worked to connect a big system of economic and social interactions between Mayan cities. This completely debunks the traditional idea that the Mayan pre-classic period, which dates back to 2000 BCE, was made of small, tribal settlements. Imagine the manpower and engineering ability you need to muster to build something close to these white highways. Scientists believe that these causeways were built pretty much the same way as the Mayans built their pyramids, with a mixture of mud and quarry stone. Oh, and using several layers of limestone to make them white. That's pretty cool, right? But let's take a few steps back for a moment to get some context. The Mayans were one of the biggest pre-Columbian civilizations living in the Americas. Until now, experts believe that at its apex, the Mayan civilization consisted of over 40 cities with a population of millions of people. That's a lot of folks. Their civilization spanned Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, and Belize. And they survived mainly on agriculture. The thing is, the Yucatan Peninsula was an extremely difficult place to grow crops. So the Mayans had to develop a complex irrigation system in most of their cities. They built a series of ceremonial buildings, pyramids, and plazas. The Mayans might have been keen pyramid builders, but they also developed an advanced astronomical system. With whatever ancient technology they had, they were able to predict the exact location of planets such as Venus and Mars, as well as the exact dates of eclipses. If you've ever seen examples of ancient Mayan cities, this is Tikal. Located at the heart of the Guatemalan jungle, Tikal is believed to have been the capital of the ancient Mayan conquest state. At its height, it was comparable in importance to cities such as London or New York in today's world. It's composed of a series of complex monuments. The North Acropolis is one of Tikal's most ancient complexes of monuments. Built solely by human hands around 350 BCE, it served as the resting place of kings and chiefs. Its monuments are up to 200 feet high. Back in the day, the step pyramid temples were painted a beautiful red. Mayans loved that color. Today, of course, you'll only see the limestone. Then there's Chichen Itza. It's got one of the best preserved pyramids on Earth to date. Located in Mexico's Yucatan state, this Mayan city is well over 1,500 years old. At its peak, it was home to 35,000 people. The site covers 4 square miles of land. The highlight is El Castillo, a tremendous step-like temple standing 80 feet above ground. Its most peculiar feature is that it has 91 steps up each of its 4 sides, including the upper platform, which makes for 365 steps, the same number of days as the solar year. You can see that these folks were a pretty big deal, huh? That's why nobody can really understand what happened to them. There's a big lack of evidence on the decline of this almighty empire. What could have been the cause of their demise? Was it a drought? New research in 2017 did bring some new discoveries into the mix. Using data from a site at Ceibal, located at southwest of Tikal, scientists analyzed radiocarbon data from ceramics and archaeological excavations to extract new information about the unexpected demise of this great civilization. The information shows that instead of a sudden collapse, the Mayans most likely fell in waves of social instability and political crises. These events are believed to have deteriorated Mayan city centers and began causing the dispersion of the Mayan population. It's hard to pinpoint the exact causes, though. But hey, recent discoveries are shedding a big light on humanity's past. Not only about the Mayan Empire, but about other long-lost civilizations of South America. A major recent discovery in Brazil was done using satellite imaging technology and is also shocking scientists. Some images from near the Xingu River, also in the Amazon, suggest that cities of millions of people might have existed inside the jungle, way before our modern civilization ever existed. I mean, if this doesn't shock you, I don't know what will. Satellite imagery also detected a network of trenches dating back to 200 and 1200 CE in the Bolivian Amazon forest. These proofs suggest settlements that could have supported around 60,000 people right in the middle of the Amazon forest. When researchers from the University of Florida went on ground to check the satellite information, they were shocked to find several mounds that were accompanied by ditches and geoglyphs. Archaeologists also found remnants of carefully designed walls centered around plazas, much like the type of construction done by the ancient Mayans.
So in the early 2000s, a geology major went on a field trip to the world's largest open-pit coal mine in Colombia. He picked up a piece of rock and noticed impressions of some prehistoric leaves on it. Then he found more rocks, and each of them had the same pattern. Back then, the student could hardly know that his discovery would help describe the largest snake that has ever lived on Earth. The student took his findings to a local scientist who called up the Smithsonian Institute and invited them for a fossil hunt. He wasn't that surprised, as he knew there were fossils in the pits of Sarihan. Back in 1990, another geologist found a fossil there and brought it to his office. He wasn't sure of what it was and called it a petrified branch. Years later, a paleontologist saw an image of this branch. He knew it wasn't a branch at all, but a fossilized jawbone of an animal. The scientist got so excited about the find that he flew all the way to Colombia. He wanted to examine the fossil, but no one had the key to its glass display case. The scientists couldn't wait, so they broke the glass and confirmed that it was a fossil of an animal that lived millions of years ago. After Herrera's finding, they knew exactly there were more fossils in the area. It took the team of scientists about 2 years to figure out they were all a part of a giant snake and not a crocodile, as they thought because of the size. They managed to establish it by looking at the vertebrae and ribs of around 30 giant snakes. Now you might think that fossils would get easily destroyed in an open-pit coal mine, but in fact, they were found under the coal that served as a protective layer for them. Sadly, the scientists couldn't find the titanoboa's skull. Unlike jaws, which are extremely powerful thanks to their muscles, snake bones are pretty fragile. That's why they usually crumble long before the sediment can appear over them. But still, the researchers managed to find 3 skull fragments. Thanks to this discovery, they've made a full-scale replica of the snake's head, which supported the theory that it used to be one of the largest predators of its time. If you're starting to freak out, don't worry, so am I. They also established it was related to modern boas and anacondas. That's how titanoboa got its name. It's basically a titanic boa. The huge snake was officially described in 2009. Titanoboa was thriving around 60 million years ago, 6 million years after the Tyrannosaurus rex roamed the planet. Back then, it enjoyed the climate of the area in South America, which is now Colombia and Peru. It got almost as long as a bowling lane, 50 feet, or twice as long as the biggest snake living today. It was as heavy as 4 giant anacondas. It got this long and this heavy thanks to a lucky coincidence. Snakes are cold-blooded animals, so they need a warm climate to live and grow in. Northeastern Colombia was perfect. It was about 90 degrees Fahrenheit when Titanoboa was alive. Titanoboa wasn't that fast, especially on land, but it most likely spent much time in or near the water. Our hero could swim at a speed of up to 12 miles per hour. Like present-day snakes, it could wriggle around and change direction really quickly. Scientists still aren't sure if it could climb trees. Paleontologists believe that Titanoboa had brownish or grayish skin. It was the perfect color for the serpent to hide in the muddy rivers of the tropical rainforests. But then again, I don't see why it would have to hide from anyone, given its size. The largest snake ever wasn't venomous, but it didn't stop it from hunting any animal it wanted. And although it could choose pretty much anything, its favorite meal was most likely fish. Whew. Scientists decided so based on the snake's palate and the number and type of its teeth. You can't recreate the giant's diet today, as all of those fish types are also extinct. When it wanted to spice up its menu, Titanoboa dined on other reptiles. It sneaked up on its prey and got them down with one quick strike. Its bite had a very special design. The structure of its jaws let Titanoboa clamp down on the body of its prey, so there was no escape. Titanoboa also had a mean set of thin and pointed teeth. They bent inwards in the snake's jaw like fishing hooks. This little feature helped Titanoboa get a grip on its prey and prevent the slightest chance of its running or swimming away. It could most likely easily swallow even large turtles and crocodiles. Now, all that sounds pretty scary, but we have nothing to worry about as Titanoboas are long extinct, right? Well, technically, as the temperatures on Earth are going up, it's quite possible that snakes might also grow in size. They love heat more than anything, so they should feel comfortable here. Of course, that would be a completely different snake, but it's not impossible that we'll see something similar to Titanoboa. But before you think of escaping to another planet, remember that huge snakes would need something huge to eat. Such giants prefer to wrap around something huge and swallow it. Most people would be simply too small for them. So unless the huge snake was starving, I don't think it'd waste its energy on attacking anything too little. Plus, like any other snake, titanoboa had a sharp and delicate sense of smell, needing exceptional conditions and was sensitive to vibrations. A little too smelly, too noisy, too cold, too dry, or too wet, and the snake wouldn't go near this place unless absolutely desperate. So, if you live in a big city, your chances of meeting a huge snake like titanoboa are about zero. Rural areas are something different, but the only place where the giant serpent would consider living would be near the equator. We already have some pretty giant snakes in the warmest regions of the world. Amethystine python, or less poetically, scrub python, is a gentle giant. It's the largest snake in Papua New Guinea and Australia. It can grow to the enormous size of 28 feet and weigh up to 77 pounds, which is about as heavy as a Dalmatian. Scrub pythons are pretty curious, sometimes slithering inside people's homes in Australia, but they're mostly harmless to humans. Their favorite food is rodents, bats, and birds that come to streams for water. Until then, pythons quietly lie in wait. They have heat sensors in the pit of their muzzles. They help the pythons better see warm-blooded animals they can have for dinner. The African rock python is one of only 11 living species of its kind. It's currently the second largest snake on the planet. This huge brown snake reaches lengths up to 20 feet and weighs about half as much as the giant panda. It's very serious about its meals, as it can catch an antelope and eat it whole. Even the cold-blooded crocodiles are afraid of this beast because it can easily eat one of their kind too. In 1958, a zoologist found a 4-foot-long young Nile crocodile inside an African python's stomach. According to the scientist, the python said, "Well, I don't know about you, but I find this whole thing hard to swallow." Actually, that's not true. Pythons can't talk, as far as we know. The reticulated python holds the record as the longest of all the living snakes in the world. The largest of these guys made it into the Guinness World Records in 2011 with a length of 25.2 feet. Its name is Medusa, and it lives in a zoo in Kansas City, Missouri. An adult reticulated python is large enough to swallow a human whole, or a whole human, either way. But these snakes are mostly quite peaceful and prefer to lie down without much movement. Although many pythons have dwarf forms that are much smaller than their full-grown cousins, reticulated pythons also have super dwarf forms. You can keep one of those as an 8-foot-long pet. Yes, it's considered a dwarf form, although it's longer than the average human is tall. You know, somehow I still don't find that comforting.
Imagine you are walking to your car in the morning, but there is a problem. Your vehicle is not sitting neatly by the side of the road. Its rear end is sticking out of a gaping hole. This is what happened to a Queens resident, New York, back in 2020. A sinkhole had swallowed his SUV overnight. Events like this are nothing out of the ordinary in many parts of the globe. But sometimes, sinkholes can hide unspoken beauty inside them. In East Asia, a recent find stunned the scientific community. Cave explorers came across a colossal sinkhole that concealed an ancient forest. It is located in a province, Guangxi Zhuang, close to the north of Vietnam, the Lê County, where researchers discovered the hidden forest is already famous worldwide for sinkholes. This one brings the number to 30. They are scattered over an area the size of 3 Gibraltars. This is just a tenth of the total number of sinkholes in the whole country. The name Tiankeng for these large holes in Earth's surface translates as sky holes or heavenly pits. The dimensions of the new sinkhole are impressive. It is over 1,000 feet long, and it's pretty deep too. You could fit the Great Pyramid of Giza 1.5 times inside it. The sinkhole's total volume matches that of 2,000 Olympic swimming pools. The exploration team had to hike for hours to reach the bottom. It was all worth it in the end. They discovered a pristine underground forest that had no trace of human activity. Scientists estimate that the plants date back to the time of the dinosaurs. The foliage reached to the explorers' shoulders. Some trees were 2 times taller than the Hollywood sign. This discovery was amazing, but not entirely unexpected. Geologists were familiar with this type of landscape. In this part of East Asia, karst topography is pretty common. The word is Slavic in origin. Since the late 19th century, geologists have been using it to describe barren limestone regions. This type of landscape features fissures in the ground, caves, underground streams, and, of course, sinkholes. Karst forms in parts of the world with heavy rainfall. The water dissolves materials such as limestone or dolomite. This creates a scenery that many people describe as wild beauty. Karst terrains have a practical purpose as well. They are ideal for storing water that humans can drink. Around 700 million people around the world use these karst aquifers as their primary water source. In the United States alone, 40% of the groundwater used for drinking comes from them. Springs of Florida and the Mammoth Cave in Kentucky are just some of the most famous karst areas. Geologists classify around a fifth of the U.S. land surface as karst. This type of terrain exists on other continents as well, in the Caribbean, Europe, Australia, and Asia. Due to local differences in climate and geology, karst doesn't appear the same everywhere. In the Spanish province of Malaga, the landscape consists of barren rock. This is what the karst regions of Italy, Slovenia, and Montenegro also look like. In East Asia, the landscape over the karst is green. This is because of the humid tropical climate. Sinkholes and cave entrances are usually hidden behind lush vegetation. The region's unique appearance got it inscribed on the UNESCO's World Heritage List in 2007. The world's second most populous country is home to 2/3 of the planet's natural occurring sinkholes, tiankengs. They start to form when rainwater seeps into cracks in the limestone. Over time, the gaps widen as more and more material is washed away. At one point, the ground above the limestone becomes unstable. The end result is the collapse of the surface layer. This happens suddenly and without prior warning signs. Once a hole forms in the ground, water starts filling it up. Another way for a sinkhole to form is the existence of an underground cave. Its roof can collapse. The shape of such sinkholes resembles a funnel. It is wider at the opening on the top and narrower near the bottom of the pool. The most famous of these sinkholes are cenotes. They occur naturally on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. The region is home to more than 2,000 cenotes. They are all former caves whose roofs had collapsed at some point in time, and they are filled with fresh water. The local people have been using them as water sources for thousands of years. The ancient Mayas gave them mystical symbolism. For them, the cenotes were passageways to the other world. In reality, they are just a feature of karst terrain. Sinkholes that form in regions with abundant rainfall and limestone beneath the surface soil. The depth of a sinkhole can vary significantly. The smallest are barely 3 feet deep. When it fills up with water, it turns into a pond. A large lake can form in the place of a large sinkhole. One example is the Red Lake in Croatia. The most impressive thing about it are the steep cliffs that rise above the lake. They are nearly 800 feet tall. The world's biggest and deepest sinkhole, Zhaoshai Tiankeng, lies in the vicinity of the Yangtze River. The outside world discovered it only in 1994. The hole is so deep that you could stack up 7 statues of liberty inside it. During the rainy season, a waterfall cascades from the pit's mouth into a cave system at the bottom. But not all sinkholes fill up with water. This was the case with the newly discovered giant sinkhole in Asia. It developed its own ecosystem. The high humidity and low temperature inside it were perfect for plant life to thrive. The very bottom of the hole is connected to an underground water flow. Scientists discovered 72 species of rare wild plants in the area. They are in danger of disappearing on the surface. But inside the sinkhole, they have found the perfect conditions for growth. The enormous opening in the ground is essentially a wildlife refuge. This was confirmed in 2021. That's when biologists discovered 2 species in the Yunnan province that they previously thought had gone extinct. Who knows what other animal and plant species are still hiding in there? Exploring these underground cave systems can be quite dangerous. They are often home to venomous snakes and mosquitoes. Even descending into a sinkhole is perilous. The cliffs are steep and stones are often very sharp. That's why the exploration of sinkholes in Asia is going slower than research would like. The sinkholes I've mentioned so far have all formed naturally. Erosion is the main process behind their creation. But the ground can also open because of human activity. Everything from a construction site to a leaking sewer pipe can cause the earth to give way. Sinkholes in urban areas pose a risk to infrastructure. One of the most famous examples of this happened in Japan in 2016. A busy street in downtown Fukuoka collapsed near the main train station. The sinkhole severed power lines and pipes that lay underground. Luckily, no one was injured. The diligent Japanese engineers repaired the damaged road section in just 48 hours. The biggest issue with sinkholes is that you never know when and where they are going to open. The best tool that geologists have for detecting underground cavities is ground-penetrating radar, GPR. It resembles a land mower. The operator goes up and down a troubled area to scan the ground underneath. The radar sends out impulses that detect any contrast between different materials. It feeds back this info in the form of a 2D or a 3D image. Once engineers detect a potential sinkhole, they use different techniques to stabilize the ground above it. The simplest method is called grouting. It involves filling the hole so it won't collapse. The most common materials are polyurethane foam and cement. The alternative is to lift a structure above the sinkhole. This technique is called underpinning. Workers drive steel rods into the load-bearing deeper layer of soil. This is the same construction method engineers use to erect stilt houses above the waterline.
Summers in the Middle East get so hot that they change the landscape dramatically and make entire cities resurface from the past. That's what happened in 2018 when the city, built by a mysterious empire on the Tigris River, was finally released from its water trap. Archaeologists rushed to the location as they didn't want to miss a rare chance to excavate the site and learn more about the history of the place. They believe they've found the Bronze Age city Zaku, founded over 3,000 years ago and fully submerged in the 1980s when a dam was built in its place. It used to be a busy hub for the Mitanni Empire for caravans on the popular trade route. It had water, which is a rarity in the area, and it was a guarantee for success. We know very little about the once powerful empire, as scientists haven't found any written chronicles in the excavated sites. That's why the archaeologists were thrilled to find an entire palace for the local ruler. Several years later, when the area became free from the water again, they found some fortifications to protect the city from foes. The highlight of their expedition was finding a huge public storehouse for trade goods and harvests, piles of wheat and barley, and imported metal and wood. Bread was the staple food for the locals, and they also loved big pots of vegetable soups and stews for lunch. Each household kept sheep, goats, cows, and pigs, so they had a steady source of milk and meat for special occasions. All the constructions found so far were built from bricks molded from mud. The walls that were underwater for over 40 years are so well preserved as if they went down yesterday. The royal palace stands out as it's larger than the other constructions, has thicker walls, and even pavements made of baked mud bricks that were sealed to be waterproof. The local king must have been in good relations with the emperor of the larger empire, of which Akiku was dependent. Traders who lived in the city collected wooden beams and took them to storehouses. The beams arrived down the Tigris River from the forests in the mountains in the north and east of Mesopotamia. Merchants came here to sell their goods and then crossed the Tigris on their way to the borderlands. Zaku was thriving as a center of commerce for about 6 centuries until it was hit by a massive earthquake in 1350. Archaeologists found 5 ceramic vessels holding over 100 clay tablets made close after the earthquake. It's almost a miracle that small tablets of unfired clay managed to survive underwater for decades. People who created those must have carved notes on clay while it was still wet. They wrote about anything, from newly stored harvests to notes for other kingdoms. Then they would let the message dry in the sun. Scribes even had to learn a different language so that everyone outside the city could read it. Scientists believe the tablets they found used to be part of a private archive. They hoped to decipher the notes to learn more about the history of Zaku and the whole empire after the terrible earthquake. The damage to the buildings was so enormous that it was impossible to restore Zaku to its former glory, and if there had been any survivors, they must have left the city. Several decades later, the Assyrians, who also lived in Mesopotamia, settled here. They built their houses on the ruins of the abandoned city and used whatever structures they could find from the previous residents as outer walls. But they stayed here only for 50 years, then decided to build a new capital on more fertile soil to make some good cash from agriculture. Archaeologists working in Zaku had to halt excavations when the water levels went back up and covered the city. They sealed the ruins in tight-fitting plastic sheets and put stones and gravel on top. They hope it will help protect the priceless site from water erosion and prevent it from disappearing again. They realize how important water from the dam is for the region, but if it recedes again, they say they'll definitely continue the excavations. There was a bustling community in today's Taklamakan Desert in China around 1,600 years ago. It lived along the Nile River, which ran through the desert for miles and got its water from the melting snow in the mountains. After 3 years of work in the area, archaeologists and scientists managed to dig up 8 tombs in the desert. Thanks to the desert heat, the clothes and artifacts inside them were almost as good as new. The people who wore those must have lived in the ancient city of Naya. Naya used to be part of a prosperous kingdom at the heart of the Silk Road trading route and had a population of over 3,000 people. Then, desert sands went rogue and swallowed the city whole. Archaeologists only found the ruins of Nija in the early 20th century. Scientists from different countries have tried to solve its mysteries. It looks like the tombs discovered at the end of the 20th century belonged to the wealthy. There were some expensive items inside: a quiver and bow, metal arrowheads, gold earrings, and a glass bead necklace, a lacquer box with a comb, makeup, and a sewing kit in one of the tombs. There was also some silk of top quality, and even the bright colors like green and yellow haven't faded on it. The fabric also had Chinese characters with quotes from historical books, which helped scientists identify the period in which it was made. Archaeologists later found a large dwelling site and the clearing of 3 ruined buildings. It will probably take many more years to understand why the city had fallen and what happened to its people. Saudi and French archaeologists teamed up near Riyadh, the Saudi Arabian capital, and stumbled upon an ancient settlement dating back 8,000 years. The scientists used all sorts of cool tech, like laser scanning, drones, and aerial photography, to unearth this Neolithic-era gem. They found the settlement in a local archaeological hotspot. Among the treasures they uncovered were a stone temple, remnants of an altar, and over 2,000 graves. All these finds tell us about ancient practices and rituals. The team also found the foundations of 4 massive buildings, corner towers, and open-air courtyards, all with underground reservoirs to store water for agricultural use. There was also a smart irrigation system with canals and cisterns, which let the city thrive in one of the driest deserts in the world. Rock drawings etched into the nearby mountain depicted the daily life of the locals. The excavations have been going on in the area for over 40 years, and scientists still keep finding new artifacts to answer more of their questions. Fishers have stumbled upon ancient bones, tools, and artifacts that are 9,000 years old on the North Sea floor. British and Dutch archaeologists and paleontologists rushed to see the finds as they were hoping it could be evidence of the submerged Doggerland. And they weren't disappointed. There were even perfect sets of footprints left by Mesolithic people who lived here. 12,000 years ago, during the last major ice age, the British Isles weren't islands at all. There was a landmass made of many hills, marshlands, and dense forests that connected them to the European continent. That landmass was Doggerland, where a prehistoric hunter-gatherer society lived and thrived. But then, the sea level started going up at the speed of 3 to 6 feet a century as glaciers were slowly but surely melting. The locals had to move to areas that today belong to England and the Netherlands. Experts decided to learn more about the history of Doggerland using data from oil companies working in the North Sea. So far, they've created digital models of what the area of 18,000 square miles might have looked like before it vanished beneath the waves. They still need to analyze samples of ancient insects and plants and the DNA of animals to get a full picture.
You're entering the territory of an amazing but abandoned wildlife park. The animal cages are overgrown with grass. Small houses have been left for a long time, and cobwebs and mold are everywhere. You walk into a dark building and see a green glow ahead. You approach and realize it's a large water tank. There's old green water in it, but you're attracted by the silhouette of a huge fish inside. You've just found a great white shark. Its body is in a formaldehyde solution, keeping it almost perfectly preserved. In 2012, Wildlife Wonderland in Australia ceased its operations. All the animals were moved from there, but the shark was forgotten. In 2018, urban explorer Luke McPherson visited this abandoned place and posted a video of the embalmed shark. The video got millions of views, and the shark got a name, Rosie. Since then, the park has attracted many tourists. Unfortunately, vandals were among them. The fish tank was damaged and graffiti was painted on it. People demanded to save the unusual find, and a few months later, when the shark tank was almost destroyed, it was moved to another working exhibition center. There, they restored the tank and renewed the liquid in it so the shark could retain its appearance. The next abandoned place is much scarier. Probably because of this, it attracts lots of visitors. We're in the Czech Republic, in the small village of Lukova. It's very beautiful here, with small houses, cozy streets, and rich nature. Among the trees, you suddenly notice the silhouette of an old chapel. Before you go inside, you realize it's completely abandoned. You see old bricks with faded paint on the walls and a rusting metal roof. It looks a little creepy. You make a step inside. If some travelers discovered this place at night, they would run away screaming from what they saw inside. There are patrons in the chapel. Most of them are sitting on benches, and some are standing. They don't move because they are plaster statues. But the most terrifying thing is that each statue is covered with a white sheet. In 1968, the chapel roof began to rot. Eventually, it collapsed, and residents stopped coming here. In 2014, an artist made some plaster statues and placed them here to make it seem as if the building was haunted. This installation attracts tourists from all over the world, which helps gather the money to restore the chapel. We're in the US now, driving along Vashon Highway. There's a dense forest on both sides of the road. You get to the bus stop and get out of the car. To see the strange find you've heard about, you need to go into the forest. You wade through bushes, mud, trees, and there you are. At first, you see nothing special, but then you look up. There's a rusty red bicycle, literally inside a tree. It's become a part of the forest. The wheels and handlebars stick out, and everything else is inside the trunk. It turns out that in 1954, a local boy was given a bicycle, but he was not very happy with his gift. The tires were very thin and hard, and the handlebar looked like it came from a child's tricycle. One day, this boy was playing in the woods with his friends, and only he had a bicycle. When everyone started to go home, the boy just left the bike by the tree. The tree continued to grow, and the bike became part of it. Let's leave cold, dark places and come right to the center of the Southern California desert. The sun is very hot, and there's no one around. Only sand, dry brush, and mountains are in the distance. A couple of hours have passed. You're thirsty. The sun burns your skin, and suddenly you see water. Or is it a mirage? You approach in hopes it isn't. Yes, this is real water, but it's not an oasis. Here, in the middle of the desert, there's an unmarked swimming pool. What a pleasure it is to jump inside. It's called a social pool. An artist built it in the summer of 2014. Absolutely anyone can use this pool, but not everyone will be able to find it. Unfortunately, there's only a carcass left of it today. Abandoned places don't just hold creepy and weird things. Some finds can make the person who found them rich. We're going to the Pigalle Red Light District in Paris. This is a residential area, and nothing looks abandoned. You go into one of these houses. You meet people at the entrance who check their mail in the box. You go up the stairs and stop at the door to a certain apartment. It looks dilapidated. You open it and step inside. What you see here reminds you of a creepy scene from a haunted house movie. All the furniture and decorations are not from this century. The whole apartment looks like an antique. A thick layer of dust covers every inch of this place. Old, creepy dolls and stuffed toys lie on the tables and the floor. Add a disturbing tune from a music box, and you have a full horror set. You feel like you've traveled a century back in time. And in a sense, it's true. The owner of the apartment moved out in the 1940s. She left everything as it was. The apartment was left untouched for 70 years. It was discovered in 2010 when people began to evaluate the property of the apartment's owner. She lived somewhere else and didn't tell anyone about the place. When appraisers opened the apartment, they found a painting by the Italian artist Giovanni Boldini, which he created in the 19th century. This painting was sold for $2.5 million. Now we go to another desert, in Namibia. Here, among the dunes, not far from the ocean coast, you find a dried-up lagoon and an old sunken ship half buried in the sand, or rather, what's left of it. The age of this Portuguese vessel is about 500 years. It originally sailed from Lisbon in 1533 and disappeared near a Namibian diamond mining city. Walking among the wreckage, you can find ship parts from those times, but the most interesting thing is a chest with gold coins. The net worth of the entire ship, along with the valuable treasure, is estimated at over $12 million. The wreckage was discovered by geologists in 2008, but its full glory was only uncovered 8 years later. And now you're walking down New York streets, passing a dark, deserted alley where you see some trash bins. You notice a painted canvas sticking out of one of them. You take it out of the trash, and it turns out to be a painting. The image isn't very clear, but it looks beautiful. You decide a piece of art doesn't belong in the trash and take it home. For the next 4 years, you try to find out something about this painting, and one day, on a website about antique stuff, you find out that this painting is a missing art masterpiece worth $1 million. This is what happened to a woman from New York in 2003. When she found the painting in the trash, she immediately felt the power emanating from it. The woman learned the painting was stolen from its owner in 1989. She returned it and received $15,000 as a reward. The painting, called Tres Personajes, was drawn by the Mexican artist Rufino Tamayo in 1970. A collector bought this work of art as a gift for his wife, but a few years later, the painting was stolen while the couple was moving into a new home. Now let's finish our journey with the most grandiose and large-scale find. We're in Turkey. You've been living in an old house for a very long time, and you want to redecorate the place. You throw out all of your obsolete stuff, and then remember, you have an old basement. You never needed it before, but now you decide to turn it into a room. You break down a wall and discover a tunnel that leads underground. Excited, you go there and realize the tunnel doesn't just lead to a secret room. It leads to a colossal underground city. In 1963, a man from Turkey discovered an ancient city going down as deep as 18 floors. It could accommodate about 20,000 inhabitants, livestock, and food supplies. It's not just a maze of tunnels. There is a chapel, a school, stables, kitchens, and other attributes of civilization. The city was founded in the Byzantine era over 1,000 years ago. It was likely built as a shelter from natural disasters and wars. The coolest detail, though, is that it's not the only underground town. It adjoins many other tunnels that stretch for several miles.
It's 1898, and you're taking part in excavations in Sahara. This place, not far away from Cairo, is full of ancient tombs and pyramids. You're in your Indiana Jones mood and hope to find something really phenomenal to become famous. Gold, manuscripts, treasure maps, mummies of famous pharaohs. Wait, a wooden bird? You're really disappointed as it looks like a regular toy. An old one, but still. Little do you know that years later, someone would propose that your bird was actually an ancient monoplane. So the artifact, nicknamed the Sahara bird, is made of a sycamore tree. The birdie has a wingspan of just 7 inches and weighs around 40 grams. A perfect original souvenir from Egypt, I would say. It's over 2,000 years old and looks pretty plain, without any carvings of feathers or other intricate ornaments. It has a beak and eyes, though, which makes our find look like a hawk, the emblem of the deity Horus. Its tail is rather unusual as it's squared, looks weirdly upright, and it seems like the sunken part of it was the place for a now missing piece. Humans love solving a good mystery, so there have been several attempts to explain the use of the birdie. First, quite simply, is that it was a ceremonial object. The second idea is that it was a toy for a child from some well-off family. It could have been some sort of boomerang, which was a popular concept in ancient Egypt. Then there was a theory that the bird had been used as a weather vane. But this one has been debunked as the figure doesn't have any holes or markings, except for the one made at the museum in Cairo to fix the exhibit on a stick. So there was no way to hang it in the past. Almost a century after the bird was found, Egyptologist Dr. Khalil Masiha proposed a new theory that it could have been a model of a monoplane. He believed the bird was missing a horizontal tailplane. Otherwise, it had its wings set at a right angle, similar to that of modern planes. It could have worked to generate the aerodynamic lift necessary for flights. Dr. Masiha also claimed that it was common at that time to place miniature models of technological inventions in tombs. So, did the ancient Egyptians really invent the plane in 200 BCE? That would make the Wright brothers, who are considered the inventors of aviation, really upset. They made one of their first flights only in 1903. There's just one way to know for sure, and that is to test the model. But you know, the ancient museum in Cairo would unlikely let one of their cherished exhibits fly around like a toy. That's why glider designer Martin Gregory built a similar model, this time of balsa wood, and concluded that even with the missing tailplane, the plane wasn't much of a flyer. Case solved? Not really. This didn't sound convincing enough to the History Channel, so they invited an aerodynamics expert to build another replica of the bird. He tested it in weather conditions similar to those in Egypt and was impressed with the little plane's abilities. So, if they did invent the prototype of a plane back in the times of pharaohs, it would be a good example of an oopart. That's an out-of-place artifact, an object that's way ahead of its time in terms of technology or history. And the Saqqara bird isn't the only example of such a revolutionary concept. In 1901, a group of divers retrieved the Antikythera mechanism from an underwater shipwreck near the Greek island of Antikythera. It's been dubbed the world's first analog computer, and it's currently dated around 100 BCE. The bronze mechanism could tell the position of the sun, moon, planets, and stars, as well as the lunar phase, the dates of upcoming solar eclipses, and even the speed at which the moon moves through the sky. No one's sure who used it and how or where it was made. But it's obvious that it's extremely precise and way too advanced for its time. The first flushing toilets in the world were invented in the middle of the 20th century. Just kidding. The ancient Minoans on the Mediterranean island of Crete and the Indus Valley civilization both came up with this brilliant invention at the same time, around 4,000 years ago. The plumbing and sanitation were so well done that no one managed to design anything better until 2,000 years later. One ancient Minoan lavatory was discovered at the Palace of Knossos. It looks like it had a wooden seat set over a tunnel that directed water from a rooftop reservoir to an underground sewer. Other varieties got water from jugs. Only the super rich people could afford all this glory. So if you wanted to shop for real estate back then, the flushing toilet would be a telltale sign you were in the rich neighborhood. Automated doors became a cool, seemingly new invention back in 1931. But the technology behind them is actually much older. Think the 1st century CE old. Mathematician and engineer Harappan of Alexandria came up with a hydraulic system to open and close temple doors. To bring it into action, you need to light a fire to produce heat. There was a brass pot under the fire, half filled with water. The inventor connected the brass pot to containers that acted as weights. When the fire was burning, the water moved into the containers. They went down and pulled the ropes. It was nothing like a supermarket door that opens in front of you before you even have time to think. Harappan's door took hours to open, and there was no way to stop the process. That's why they only opened the doors once a day before people entered the temple, to add some mysticism at the temple during ceremonies. Spooky. Looks like the first ever battery was invented in Baghdad around 2,000 years ago. A German archaeologist found this oval-shaped clay jar in 1938. Scientists are still not sure what purpose it served and who exactly invented it. There is a theory that it was used for electroplating objects with precious metals. When they filled it with a weak acid like vinegar, the battery produced around 1 volt of electricity. Another theory says it was a vessel for sacred scrolls. Would you like to buy contact lenses designed by Leonardo da Vinci himself? In 1508, he invented a glass lens with a funnel on one side. You were supposed to wear it with water inside to improve your vision. Sounds a bit uncomfortable, doesn't it? So, around a century later, French scientist René Descartes decided to improve the idea and make the cornea contact the future lenses. Contacts because they contact your eyes, get it? The glass tube with liquid did help improve vision, but blinking was sadly impossible. 2.5 centuries later, new technologies in the glass industry let scientists design contacts that would fit in the eye and even let the wearer blink. Thanks, guys! Still, those lenses were made of heavy blown glass and didn't let the eye breathe. About 50 years later, contacts became plastic, lightweight, unbreakable, and scratch-resistant, but still covering the entire eye. And then, in 1948, an English optical technician accidentally sanded down a plastic lens and figured out they'd still be in place even if they covered only the cornea. Imagine you're living in 19th century London and need to send a message to New York. It would have taken about 10 days to get there by ship. So when delivery time went from days to hours in 1858, it was a true sensation. The first message was sent by Queen Victoria herself. It was all made possible thanks to the transatlantic telegraph cable, running under the ocean. Sadly, the new cool invention only lasted a few weeks. It took years to bring it back to life.
In 79 CE, the Vesuvius volcano erupted and burned down two beautiful cities of the Roman Empire, Pompeii and Herculaneum. Many of you have probably heard about this tragic story. However, few people know that in the middle of the 18th century, archaeologists discovered ancient scrolls from that time amongst the ruins of Herculaneum. For any scientist or historian, such a discovery is a treasure trove that offers insights into the thoughts and lives of people from over 2,000 years ago. However, the problem was that 1,800 scrolls were found in very poor condition, singed by the heat of the volcano, coated in ash and soot. They had become hardened black lumps. Brittle as coal, any careless movement could destroy them. Scientists were aware that invaluable knowledge from an ancient Roman library was concealed within, and endeavored to decipher the texts. One method was to cut the scrolls in half and scrape off the thin layers of solid dust and ashes. Then, the researchers created a special machine that could slowly unroll the scrolls. They managed to read a few words, but unfortunately, such methods damaged and even destroyed some of the artifacts. In those instances, archaeologists could only wait for advancements in technology that would allow them to unfold and read the scrolls. And finally, this day has arrived. Artificial intelligence has now enabled researchers to decipher texts written 2,000 years ago, even though the inscriptions on the scrolls were charred and nearly illegible. Initially, scientists scanned the scrolls and created high-resolution digital models. This process allowed specialists to identify the areas where ancient ink had altered the texture and shape of the papyrus fibers. In the regions where ink was applied, the papyrus was slightly thicker and contained a higher level of carbon, the key component of the ink. The researchers developed a machine learning model capable of detecting these subtle details within the papyrus. They uploaded thousands of 3D images of the scrolls to the internet, inviting people to collaborate with AI in decoding the text. During the early stages, the system occasionally made errors, making human assistance essential. To incentivize participation, scientists and investors from Silicon Valley offered $1 million to anyone who could successfully decode the texts. This initiative significantly accelerated the process, resulting in the deciphering of several passages from the ancient works. Fragments of the first transcripts are like a blog about how to enjoy life. The author of the scroll, Philodemus, was a follower of the Greek philosopher Epicurus, who considered pleasure and luxury the highest goal in his life. So, Philodemus thought so too. We do not right away believe things that are scarce to be absolutely more pleasant than those which are abundant. It feels as if it was written by some modern influencer talking about a detox program or a diet. It seems that people who lived 2,000 years ago were almost the same as modern ones. Philodemus was apparently a wealthy man, because he lived in a villa that may have belonged to Julius Caesar's father-in-law. In his works, the author criticized the Stoics, who couldn't say anything about pleasure at all. Philodemus was such an ardent fan of Epicureanism that one of the scientists compared him to a guy who collected albums from only one band and nothing else. Several hundred Herculaneum scrolls remain unread. Scientists believe that they may contain works by Aristotle, Homer, Sophocles, and the Stoics. Fortunately, with modern AI technologies, the decryption process will go on much faster. But how did historians and linguists decipher ancient texts in the past centuries? It was actually a very difficult mental job. Let's say you found an ancient slab in the 19th century somewhere in Greece. To understand what was written there, you'd have to compare it to several other deciphered plates with similar writings of that era or similar languages. Letter by letter, symbol by symbol, you'd be deciphering ancient writings for several months or even years to figure out, say, the recipe for ancient mashed potatoes. Fortunately, with the development of computer technology, those days are long gone. Now, all ancient scrolls can be scanned and uploaded to a database on a computer. You may not even have to decipher the text for a long time if the computer finds a match of characters in other ancient manuscripts. But even if you have a perfectly preserved piece of papyrus or an ancient book where all letters are visible, this doesn't mean that you and AI will be able to decipher it. One of the most famous encrypted texts is the Voynich manuscript. This work, which consists of 240 colorful pages, was acquired by Polish bookseller in 1912. He found that book intriguing because of astrological symbols, unknown plants, and unusual human figures drawn on its pages. And all this was accompanied by handwritten texts. The author had beautiful, clear handwriting, but the language of the book is still unknown. Someone wrote this art book around the beginning of the 15th century and divided it into 6 sections devoted to botany, astronomy, biology, cooking, medicine, and cosmology. Many scientists and linguists have tried to decipher the mysterious drawings with inscriptions, but no one has gotten reliable results. Even AI couldn't help this difficult task. Some believe that this book is dedicated to science, and others believe that it contains knowledge about witchcraft. Perhaps it's a mix of science and magic. According to one version, the manuscript is a medical textbook that copied information from other scientific works from the Middle Ages. Before the invention of the printing press, people copied books and rewrote them by hand without worrying about copyrights. It's possible that the author of the manuscript outlined all their knowledge about herbal medicines and the influence of astrology on health. People in the past believed that the state of the body and stars in the sky were connected. The coolest thing is that the book has been scanned. You can download it in high resolution and try to decrypt it yourself. Who knows? Maybe you will succeed and get some ancient secret knowledge. An unknown language or poor text condition may not always be a problem for linguists. Imagine that you open some copy of classical literature dated to the 19th century. You read the pages carefully, and at the end of the day, you feel slightly unwell. You read the book every day and feel worse and worse. At some point, you go to the hospital, and doctors tell you that you've been poisoned. Yeah, sometimes working with old books can be literally dangerous for your health. There are even catalogs of poisonous books in the world. They are toxic not because someone intentionally sprayed them with poison to hurt the reader, but because people wanted to make books look more colorful. Recently, 2 such books have been withdrawn from the National Library of France because of their bright green covers. The pages were ordinary, but the hardcover could have been coated with arsenic. The mass production of books took place in the 19th century. Book publishers wanted to release as many copies as possible, so they used not expensive leather covers for them, but cheaper fabric options. To make a book attractive to customers, they painted them in bright green, yellow, red, and other colors. They got the green color of the cover thanks to the bright pigment created from copper and arsenic. It was a very cheap dye, but brighter than other dyes containing copper carbonate. An arsenic dye was used not only for books, but also to create candles and wallpaper. The problem was that the dye's pigment decomposed quickly and released toxic carcinogenic fumes. Arsenic caused severe health problems. People calmly lived in their homes and couldn't understand what was happening to them. The same thing happened to many readers of that time. It was only by the end of the 19th century that people stopped selling toxic items. Now, to read a poisonous book, if you want to do it that is, you have to wear gloves and a protective mask. And after work, wash your hands thoroughly. Ever since Plato wrote about the allegory of Atlantis, humanity has been fascinated with the possibility of the discovery of a thriving underwater civilization. Fancy joining me on a trip to a few historic underwater sites? Let's see what we can find out about ancient civilizations. The first one on our list is what is being called the underwater Stonehenge. Scientists have recently discovered a mysterious pile of cairns that stretch for miles under the shimmering waters of Lake Constance at the borders of Switzerland, Germany, and Austria. Archaeologists began to explore the site back in 2015, and they haven't been able to understand yet what it was actually used for. What they do know is that there is a 12-mile line of 170 human-made stone cairns under Lake Constance. Scientists say this was most likely the result of a combined work of several villages. The cairn site was probably used for some collective purpose. The formations are huge. Some of them are several dozen feet wide. The most amazing discovery so far is that the site dates back to around 5,500 years ago. Now, what were we humans doing back then? We were living in the prime years of the so-called Stone Age. We were beginning to make artifacts from stone and use them to hunt and eat. Can you imagine what a knife and fork might have looked like back in those days? It's no coincidence that scientists call this site the underwater Stonehenge, though. Both sites are believed to have been built around the same period of time. You see, Stonehenge dates back to around 3100 BCE. Both sites carry the distinct characteristic of stone monuments built in a circle. Not to mention the fact that scientists also haven't figured out why on earth our early ancestors would feel the need to build a monument such as Stonehenge. Well, the mystery of Lake Constance hasn't been solved yet. Who were the Neolithic people from this area? And for what purpose did they go through such an amount of work and effort to build this huge stone site? Next, we're taking you on a tour of the Ryukyu Islands just off the coast of Japan. You're diving deep down to an archaeological site. But I should warn you, the waters of the Pacific Ocean are far from smooth. It doesn't take long before you see a huge structure, thanks to the sunlight shining down on the seabed. At first, it looks like Machu Picchu's ruins located across the globe in Peru. As you approach the site, you slowly figure out its forms. A pyramid-shaped structure, arches, staircases. It's something that could have easily been a palace or a castle. Could this be a sign of human activity? What you've just seen is known today as the Yonaguni Monument. It also goes by the name of Japan's Atlantis. The entire monument is about the size of 5 soccer fields and the height of a 5-story building. Its most surprising feature is its expanse of terraces. Explorers and scientists believe that Yonaguni might be 10,000 years old. But whether it's a human-made structure or a natural formation is still under debate. For Japan's top marine geologist, Professor Masaki Kimura, Yonaguni is the heritage of a lost civilization. Kimura has dived to the bottom of the ocean to explore the ruins over 100 times over the past 10 years. According to him, there are clear signs of human activity down there. On the monument's surface, there is a triangle-shaped concave that is a historical symbol of water fountains in the region. There's also a giant turtle carved on the eastern side of the structure. And, according to Kimura, turtles have an important cultural meaning. Several pieces of stone tools have been recovered from the site. Their estimated age is around 10,000 years. However, not all scientists support this theory. For many, Yonaguni is the result of thousands of years of erosion. The fact that the monument is composed of one massive rock leads them to believe it's not human-made. The defined edges and flat surfaces resemble a natural formation in Northern Ireland, known as the Giant's Causeway. The basalt columns look like the ruins of a palace, but they're actually the result of volcanic activity in the region. Now, you're flying to the coast of Greece, 4 hours away from Athens. More specifically, you're in the Peloponnese Peninsula. You dust off an old snorkel and head for a free dive on a bright sunny day. Sometime into the dive, you start noticing patterns on a seabed. 13 feet below the surface, outlines of familiar objects start to appear, one by one. As you continue swimming, what looks like the outline of an entire city emerges in front of your eyes. Are you wondering how water could have taken the whole city? Rocks are perfectly aligned into what appears to be the foundation of a building. This is Pavlopetri, an ancient city you've probably heard about for the first time. It was discovered by Nicholas Fleming, a British oceanographer, when he was on vacation in Greece. He had heard rumors about Pavlopetri's existence and indeed found several artifacts on the seafloor. He went back to the area a year later with the team. They found a site filled with pots, storage vessels, and tools. A kernstone, for instance, is a tool used for grinding grains and turning them into flour. Multiple amphoras indicate that this settlement dates back to the Bronze Age, 5,500 years ago, when people started living in towns. The settlement is believed to have existed for over 2,400 years. Today, Pavlopetri is considered the oldest submerged town ever discovered, and what's impressive is that it wasn't a simple village. It was a vibrant port city with stone buildings, a marketplace, streets, and even squares. The next stop on our voyage is one of today's most famous underwater cities that has been turned into an archaeological park. The city of Port Royal in Jamaica exists only below the surface, but in 1692 it was one of the wealthiest cities in the Western Hemisphere. Port Royal was the center of the British Empire at the time and an important trade city that attracted people from all over the region. It was also home to real-life pirates of the Caribbean. On the morning of June 7, 1692, the people of Port Royal met a different fate than they had probably expected. The city woke up shaking. People were thrown out of their beds by the power of a massive earthquake, ranking 7.5 on a Richter scale. One survivor said he had seen Earth opening up and swallowing the whole town. What he said could be true, as the city was mainly built on sand. The ground swallowed buildings, roads, you name it. Geysers erupted, and finally, waves as big as 10-story buildings hit the city. About 33 acres of the city disappeared under the water. Amazingly, most of its 17th century remains are still in good condition under 40 feet of water. Archaeologists have found taverns, storage rooms, kitchens, and recreational buildings used for diverse purposes. You can also see a grand lion statue, a submerged bridge, and many picturesque arches. Of course, I saved the best for last: India. Just off its coast lies another sunken marvel. A site known as the Lost City of Cambay is located in the Gulf with a similar name. It remained undiscovered until 2001, when the National Institute of Ocean Technology made a routine water assessment. With the help of sonar technology, which sends a wave sound to the bottom of the sea, they found something far beneath the surface. Images showed well-defined geometric shapes spread along a 5-mile stretch. The remains date to more than 9,500 years ago, meaning this civilization was lost at around the end of the Ice Age. Debris recovered from the site included construction material, pottery, beads, sculptures, and even bones. Scientists argue whether these artifacts are indeed from the site, but if they truly are, then the lost city of Cambay might be the oldest civilization in the world.
Surprise! There's more than 7 continents on our planet. Argoland, a hidden continent, may help us understand how our planet will look in the future. To find out how it hid from us and what secrets it holds, well, you'll just have to keep watching. Ready for a mystery? Scientists have been looking for a piece of land that's been missing for over 100 million years. Not exactly newsworthy, since people search for information about our planet's history all the time. You'd think it was probably this minuscule island somewhere in the middle of an ocean. Well, you'd be wrong, because this continent used to be as big as the entire U.S. territory. For a long time, geologists have been wondering whether a massive chunk of contemporary Australia vanished into thin air. Some believed it was simply hiding somewhere on the ocean floor. But thanks to some Dutch specialists and 7 years of investigating, we now know there are bits and pieces of this lost land mixed underneath the lush jungles of Southeast Asia. The continents we see in our geography manuals these days are like scattered pieces of a puzzle. There's even a nice experiment you can conduct to see for yourself. Find a world map online and print it out. Cut out all of the continents and play around with them for a while. You'll see they all fit together. Probably the most striking thing you'll see is how South America perfectly fits near Africa. If you close up the oceans that were formed in the last 200 million years, the continents look like they form a giant letter C. And that C is what scientists call the supercontinent Pangaea. It was swimming in an ocean called Panthalassa, and the inner portion of that letter C had a smaller stretch of water called the Tethys Ocean. It is in this small ocean where things get interesting. Back in the Jurassic period, this vanished continent, which scientists started calling Argoland, vanished and left a hole in Australia, now known as the Argo-Abyssal Plain. Geologists initially believed this was all due to a process called subduction. It's when one piece of the Earth's crust dives under another and recycles it into the planet's mantle. Usually, specialists track this continental vanishing through off-scraping. That's how they figured out, for instance, that India bumped into Asia and gave us the majestic Himalayan mountains. But for Argoland, things were a bit more complicated. Bits and pieces were popping up in places like Myanmar and Indonesia, but they behaved like these time-traveling relics, looking way older than when Argoland supposedly separated from Australia. It immediately raised the question: if one continent can behave so weirdly, how many others are out there doing the same? Thankfully, scientists have now put together the entire timeline of Argoland and figured out its mystery. It didn't sink or get swallowed up. It simply transformed into an archipelago, breaking into smaller pieces, called microcontinents, and floating away from Australia. These mini-continents then took a little journey before settling down in Southeast Asian jungles. This discovery fits right into the whole Pangaea puzzle. It helps us better understand how continents break up and make up, all in one discovery, revealing secrets of biodiversity and climate back from in the day. If you'd like to find out more secrets about history, civilization, or random day-to-day objects, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Like, for instance, the mystery behind this invisible species line in Indonesia. It's called the Wallace Line, named after the British explorer Alfred Russel Wallace. Over 150 years ago, Wallace was on a journey around the Malay archipelago, visiting thousands of islands. What he found was that animals on one side of this invisible line were considerably different from ones on the other side. This invisible line is like a wall between marsupials and tigers, for instance, or honey-eaters and trogons. But now we know that around 35 million years ago, Australia broke up with Antarctica and collided with Asia, and this continental love triangle triggered significant changes. It didn't just change the way the land looked, it also messed with the species of animals on each side of the Wallace Line. In more recent times, a bunch of specialists published a study saying this collision and climate chaos made Asian species comfy living in the Malay archipelago. Meanwhile, the Aussie animals weren't as happy with the new environment. It was too hot and wet for some, and others just couldn't handle the tropical island lifestyle. The discovery of this continental shift towards Asia might also explain a recent finding of a human species that didn't seem to make any sense either. You see, in this hidden cave in the Philippines, archaeologists stumbled upon a new human ancestor. It seems that about 50,000 years ago, on the island of Luzon, there was this ancient human-like species. The lead researcher believed this finding was crucial for understanding human evolution in Asia, and it named this new species after the island, Homo luzonensis. Now, here's where it gets a bit confusing. The bones found by archaeologists had one small problem. They had a weird mix of traits that hadn't been seen together in any other hominid species. Smaller teeth, similar to ours, yet hands and feet that were more like our ancient humanoid ancestors. It was those throwback limbs in particular that connected this human species with the long-lost southern territory. That's because they have this primitive look, like these hard-to-pronounce guys, for instance. Only these two species are separated by 2 to 3 million years of time in evolution. Many have wondered, is Homo luzonensis really a new species? Not everyone is convinced. But it may also explain why living creatures are also affected by the constant shifting of the land underneath us. Now, just because they haven't changed much during our lifetime, it doesn't mean our continents will look like this forever. They evolved from this large megacontinent, and they'll most likely end up in a similar position in the future. On that note, a geologist from a European university tried to predict the future of Earth's supercontinents. As a starting point, he used an earthquake that occurred in Portugal back in 1755, when tectonic plates behaved a bit differently than they should have. After years of research, he came up with a theory in 2016. He believed that the stitches between these tectonic plates might be coming apart, setting the stage for a bigger rupture. It's like when glass cracks between two holes in a car windshield. If this happens, a subduction zone could stretch from the Mediterranean all the way up past Ireland, bringing volcanoes, earthquakes, and new mountains to these areas. If all goes according to this plan, the Atlantic Ocean will disappear, and so will the Pacific, turning into one large stretch of water. Instead of the 7 continents we know today, we'll get a new supercontinent, which he called Arica, because it would have Australia and the Americas at its heart. Now, it's not the only possible scenario, though. Novo Pangea might be another, and it's easy to foresee. The Atlantic stays open and the Pacific closes. Then there's Amasia. For this one, you'd have to imagine the Arctic Ocean closing and the Atlantic and Pacific staying open. Everything shifts to the north around the North Pole, except Antarctica. One final scenario would be called Pangea Ultima. Slow down the spreading in the Atlantic, and a new subduction plate pops up on the America's east coast. Well, either way, if all the continents collide in the future once more, some say it won't be fun to experience. It's believed that in around 250 million years, we'll feel like we're being trapped in a sweltering, soggy plastic bag. Weirdly, that bag will be the best place to live on Earth, the coastal areas. As for the inland spots, they'll be sizzling, like a desert on fire. Many of the species of animals we know today might not make it. As for us humans, we'll need to be creative if we want to withstand the heat. We should be thankful, though. These digital models are still great because we can use them to test all sorts of interesting ideas. For example, how these supercontinents would mess with tides. Taking future space travels into consideration, these models can help us understand the climates of exoplanets too. Those are located outside our solar system.
In the 80s, David Mazurek from Michigan decided to buy a farm not far from Mount Pleasant. The previous owner was showing David around his new property when he noticed a large, weird-looking rock. It was handily used to keep open a barn door. Mazurek inquired about the origins of the doorstop, and the farmer explained it was actually a meteorite. It had arrived at the property with a loud bang back in the 30s. The following morning, the farmer and his father found the crater the meteorite had left and dug out the guest from space, which was still warm. They found a practical use for it to serve as the doorstop, and the good news for the new owner was that the meteorite came with the property. He decided not to change anything about it for as long as he lived at the property. When he was moving to a new home, he took the rock with him and used it as an interstellar doorstop for another 30 years. Sometimes, David would let his children take it to school to show it to others. Then he found out that Michigan residents find and sell pieces of meteorites for some good money. Since his piece was huge, weighing 22 pounds, he decided to take it to Central Michigan University to find out its value. A local geology professor was getting tired of similar requests because, for 18 years, the finds that people brought her turned out to be not meteorites at all. But this time, she could feel something special from the start. She tested the rock and determined it was a real meteorite made from 88.5% iron and 11.5% nickel. It turned out to be the 6th largest recorded find of this kind in Michigan and the most valuable specimen she's ever worked with. They sent a slice for another round of verification to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., and it was all officially confirmed. It also turned out that the meteorite was a piece of an early solar system. Both the Smithsonian and the Maine Museum considered purchasing the rock for a hefty sum. In the end, Mazurek sold his meteorite to Michigan State University's Abrams Planetarium for $75,000. He gave 20% of the money to Central Michigan's University's Earth and Atmospheric Sciences Department, where they confirmed the rock's true identity. For ages, a painting by the renowned 13th century Florentine artist Cimabue seemed to have vanished into thin air. But in 2019, it made a surprise appearance in the cozy home of an elderly woman residing in the French countryside. The lady was about to sell the house and invited an auctioneer to see how much she could get for her belongings. I guess she didn't expect the painting that had adorned a space about a kitchen hot plate could be worth millions. The auctioneer recognized the painting had the brushstrokes of a famous painter who lived centuries ago. Expertise confirmed it was an original, a part of a series made in 1280, and one of the only 11 paintings by Cimabue left in the world. Infrared light unveiled subtle corrections the artist had made during the creation process, which only solidified its authenticity. Art experts thought the painting would sell at an auction for around $6 million, but they were wrong. The real price the new owner eventually paid was over $26 million. Back in 1831, a chessboard with intricately carved chess pieces, all made from walrus ivory, was found in the sandy dunes on the Isle of Lewis. 5 of the chess pieces were missing. Almost 2 centuries later, a family from Edinburgh brought a chess piece to the prestigious Sotheby's auction house. The grandfather of the family bought it in 1964 for just $6. He passed it on to his daughter, and although the family had no idea about the real value or importance of the piece, they felt it was really special. It was kept in the house as a family heirloom they'd sometimes take out to admire. As the Sotheby's staff examined the piece, they realized it was a 12th or early 13th century Lewis chess piece from the renowned set. The other Lewis chess piece had found their home in institutions like the British Museum and the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh. The intricate craftsmanship, the historical significance, and the mystery of its journey all added up to the value of the piece, which sold at an auction in London for $925,000. Imagine shopping at a car boot sale and getting a 26-carat diamond ring for $13. Sounds like an urban legend, but it actually happened to a lady in the UK. She was convinced that her purchase was a piece of costume jewelry and casually wore it around for 30 years. One day, she decided to check if the ring was worth more than $13 with a local jeweler. It turned out that the rock was a cushion-shaped diamond set which most likely belonged to royalty or a person of great wealth in the 19th century. It was before modern diamond mines were discovered, and there were really few of those rocks available in the whole world. It was so hard to imagine a diamond in it because it hardly looks like the ones we're used to today. When we think of diamonds, we imagine something sparkling bright. This one was made for candlelight and had an old-fashioned cut and mount which darkened over time. The silver had tarnished, and there was most likely some dirt on it. The ring was sold at Sotheby's fine jewelry auction in London for almost $850,000. Experts believe it's not the end of its journey. The new owner can recut it to make it look more modern, and with more sparkle, it could be worth many times that price. Back in 2011, Frank Abrams, a defense attorney from North Carolina, stumbled upon a 19th century tintype photograph at a flea market. He purchased it for $10. It looked like an ordinary picture of 5 cowboys, but experts had reason to believe that one of these cowboys is none other than the infamous outlaw, Billy the Kid. Abrams realized that he might possess a historical gem after watching a TV program about a photo featuring Billy the Kid playing croquet. A Google search led him to images of Pat Garrett, the sheriff of Lincoln County, New Mexico, who was known for taking Billy's life. Abrams was stuck as he saw a figure in this photograph that resembled Pat Garrett, and he wondered if the lean man in the background might be Billy the Kid. He asked for the help of forensic analysts and professors, who had reasons to believe that the photo indeed captured Billy the Kid and Garrett. A handwriting expert in Texas was able to match a signature on the image to known samples of Garrett's handwriting. Experts date the photograph to the late 19th century. How this image ended up in a North Carolina flea market remains a mystery. Another recently discovered photo of Billy the Kid depicting him playing croquet has been valued at $5 million. As for Abrams' tintype, its potential value could be even higher. Abrams, though, doesn't want to part with this historical treasure. He considers himself fortunate and privileged to have found it. Larry Ah, a maintenance worker at Milwaukee's Capitol Court Mall, was tidying up the storage room as the mall was about to get demolished. He found a pair of sneakers tucked away amidst the trash. He quickly realized that these were no ordinary shoes, and they certainly didn't belong to the discard pile. Ah noticed a distinctive signature of Michael Jordan on the side of one shoe. He remembered that these sneakers being showcased in the sports apparel store Playmakers back in the day. The shoes, a size 13, had the inscription, "My very best." Ah decided to put these shoes up for auction, and the expected price for them was set at $20,000.
Hey, look at this rock. At first sight, it looks like a regular boring rock, the likes of which you can see when walking along the beach. Its color doesn't stand out, and its weight is pretty regular, around 4 pounds. But everything changes when you learn that this rock was born on Mars, traveled all the way to Earth, and ended up in Antarctica. Ah, now the story sounds much more fascinating. So let's find out the details. Researcher Roberta Score, who worked on the ANSMET project, which stands for Antarctic Search for Meteorites, of the Denver Antarctic Program, found this meteorite in 1984. If you want to decipher the name of the space traveler, I can help you. It comes from the place where the scientists spotted it, the Allen Hills of Antarctica, hence ALH. And then we've got the year of the discovery and the number of the sample. If you think that Roberta picked up the rock and exclaimed something like, "Woohoo, I'm holding a chunk of Mars," I'll have to disappoint you. At the very beginning, it was totally unclear where the meteorite came from. And one thing confused researchers even more. The meteor was very different from other meteorite groups found on our planet. Okay, but then how did they finally figure out it was a visitor from Mars? All thanks to traces of gas similar to those that make up the atmosphere of the red planet. We learned about its composition thanks to the brave Viking lander that carried out the necessary analysis in situ in 1976. Anyway, back to our rocky discovery. It's actually very special, and not only because the rock arrived from far, far away. Among those several thousand meteorites found on Earth, just around 100 have likely come from Mars. And even so, our guy is different from them and seems to be part of a separate group. So let's go into the past and follow the life story of this cosmic traveler. It most likely formed around 4 billion years ago on its home red planet. One day, which wasn't very different from others, turned out to be life-changing for this peaceful rock. A meteorite impact catapulted into space, and it started its own journey as a small asteroid. At that time, it was way larger than at the moment of discovery on Earth. At one point, ALH got close to Earth and, who knows, probably decided to explore something. That's how, 13,000 years ago, it ended its space journey by colliding with our planet. At the moment, this Martian fragment is the oldest we've got. But at first, it wasn't all that popular. Only in 1996 did it become way more famous after a groundbreaking discovery. You see, some NASA researchers started wondering, well, the fragment is obviously very old, but then could it have recorded any traces of life that could have been thriving on Mars at the time ALH formed on the red planet? And guess what? Those scientists turned out to be right. They detected traces of very fine magnetite particles. Those were completely similar in structure and chemical composition to the particles we have on Earth. They're called magnetofossils, and magnetotactic bacteria produce them. So it might mean that, at one point, there were some forms of life on Mars. In April 2020, scientists from the Japanese Space Agency made another discovery. They detected nitrogen containing organic material of Martian origin in our meteorite. So, who knows what new astounding secrets further examination of the meteorite might reveal? At the moment, though, all you can do is travel to Antarctica and find more of them. The thing is, this place is great for meteorite hunting. Surprisingly, we have found nearly 50,000 meteorites in Antarctica, and hundreds of thousands are still waiting to be discovered. Each of these space rocks can tell us a story of the evolution of the solar system. For example, the very first lunar rock found on the icy deserted continent proved that chunks of space objects larger than asteroids can also end up on Earth. So, let's say you got inspired and decided to go meteorite hunting all the way to Antarctica. Well, get ready for some serious challenges. Despite their potential abundance, finding space rocks isn't as easy as it might seem. You'll have to visit remote areas, and there's still no guarantee that you'll be able to spot a meteorite. And that's actually a huge problem. Meteorites are vanishing from sight. Currently, scientists find about 1,000 meteorites in Antarctica each year. But according to a new study, about 5,000 more get hidden out of sight every year. The culprit is warming temperatures. Worried scientists created a model that could help them figure out where those meteorites might surface. This model was quite complicated, taking into consideration snow cover, surface temperature, the speed at which ice flows, and even the steepness of the terrain. After that, they ran simulations under various warming scenarios. It turned out that meteorites indeed sank out of sight as temperatures rose. To say that the researchers were upset is obvious. They didn't expect that climate change would affect their work so much. Even though those areas are below freezing, people still managed to ruin a crucial archive of the solar system. But let's get back to your meteorite hunt. If you want your chances to find one to be higher, travel to the base of mountains or outcrops where ice, which usually flows to the lower ground, is forced to move upward. But make sure to take your windbreaker with you. In those places, powerful winds brush away snow, exposing bright, vivid blue ice. Instead of melting, this ancient ice can change directly into water vapor, and it helps expose meteorites that would otherwise remain hidden. You need to hurry though. Meteorites at the surface disappear quickly. Even when temperatures are well below freezing, the rocks can still absorb some of the sun's heat and melt the ice. It's like they're creating underground, or shall I say under ice, tunnels for themselves, sinking and hiding from sight. Sometime later, refreezing closes the entrance to those tunnels, effectively trapping meteorites inside, tucked out of sight. Now, scientists admit it's very tricky to find working methods to spot meteorites. And if we don't hurry and develop such methods, we might lose between 80,000 and 250,000 space rocks in total. No wonder scientists are on a mission to find more meteorites. They're focusing on meteorite stranding zones. Those are places where meteorites often gather on the surface because of specific features of geology, ice flow, and climate conditions. As you already know, you can find meteorites on blue ice without snow cover. This makes meteorites easy to spot. But finding such hotspots is often pure luck. Or you gotta sit day and night, scouring maps and satellite images in attempts to spot blue ice zones near research stations. Let me introduce Veronika Tolanov, a glaciologist, and her team. They've taken things to the next level by developing a smart Antarctic-wide map. To do it, they've used machine learning and satellite data from NASA, the Canadian Space Agency, and others. This map highlights areas where meteorites might be hiding based on past finds and all kinds of climate and ice data. Apparently, the best places to find meteorites are along the edges of the continent and near mountains with blue ice. Unfortunately, it's not just the blue ice that matters. The temperature and speed of the ice flow are also super important. For example, if the ice flows too quickly, meteorites get swept away before they can accumulate. So, if you want to find a meteorite, you have to wait for very precise conditions. The surface temperature has to stay below 16 degrees Fahrenheit almost all the time. Otherwise, meteorites sink. You can start with the Allen Hills region. Yup, that's where our ALH friend was discovered. This area is kind of a meteorite gold mine with more than 1,000 finds. But there are even more promising places, like the Fimbulheimen Mountains, and no one has searched there yet. You might be the first. In any case, with this new map, researchers developed a where-to-go index that ranks the best meteorite hunting spots, making future field trips much more targeted. And with plenty of blue ice regions still unexplored, there are tons of meteorites just waiting to be found. So, what are you waiting for?
On September 16th of 2023, without warning, the Earth began to hum. A low, strange vibration reverberated through the crust. This set off seismic alarms all across the globe. For 9 days straight, the planet was pulsing with this horrifying rhythm, and scientists had no idea what was going on. Meanwhile, the total disaster was happening in Greenland. It wasn't an earthquake. They knew that much. They could tell it by the rhythm. Since we all live on giant tectonic plates, they constantly move and slide on magma like icebergs on water. Sometimes, as they move, they can rub against each other or collide or break. In any case, all this causes an incredible release of energy that sends shockwaves through the ground. That's when we feel the ground literally shaking, and it's what we call an earthquake. These vibrations we feel are called seismic waves. Seismometers pick them up as pings or rumbles. In a typical earthquake, they create a bunch of different frequencies. It's a crazy chaotic mix of low and high frequencies, like smashing every piano key. What was weird about the Greenland event is that the signals weren't like that at all. It was a steady, single-frequency vibration, as if some ancient machine was stirring beneath the earth. It's like one piano key being struck over and over, creating a doom-like, repetitive sound. Turns out, what they were hearing wasn't the noise of tectonic plates going wild. It was a phenomenon seismologists had never seen before. The days passed, and the mysterious noise just kept going. The vibrations repeated every 90 seconds, echoing around the world. The hunt for answers was growing more desperate. Seismologists had no idea what they were dealing with. They had to gather a huge international team of 68 people from 15 countries. All these scientists were gathering seismic data, satellite images, and doing some advanced math for several days, until they finally realized who the culprit was. Water. It all happened in a remote, desolate region of East Greenland. This place is full of fjords, narrow inlets of the sea between high cliffs, kinda like deep water-filled valleys surrounded by towering rocky sides. In this area, surrounded by jagged peaks and icy waters, the air was still. The landscape seemingly frozen in time. Nothing here changed much for years. Until one day. A colossal landslide has unfolded in the Dixon Fjord. One of those steep mountainsides towering over the fjord at almost 4,000 feet high collapsed in a massive landslide. Picture a huge chunk of this mountain crumbling and crashing down into the fjord below. This sent a deluge of rock and ice crashing into the water. The impact was just apocalyptic, 882 million cubic feet of debris. That's enough ice and rock to fill 10,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools, or 10 Great Pyramids of Giza. And all this nightmare hurled into the water with such force that it kick-started a tsunami about 360 feet high, taller than the Statue of Liberty into the air. What's crazy is that this incredibly powerful wave was trapped in the fjord by narrow cliffs, unable to escape. It's like water sloshing in a closed bathtub. For 9 days, the mega tsunami continued to churn through it. That's why we heard this endless hum. It was a rhythmic back and forth of the water slamming against the walls. The shock waves were rippling deep into Earth's crust, vibrations so strong that they were picked up by seismometers around the globe. This was a phenomenon so rare, so unprecedented, that it left scientists stunned. It turned out to be a perfect storm of elements. A glacier, weakened by years of warming, could no longer bear the weight of the mountain above. This collapse was inevitable, and the chaos literally shook the Earth to its core. And people often hang out in this area with cruise ships passing by. We're lucky that no lives were lost in the disaster. It was a close call though. A tourist ship stranded in the area just 2 days before narrowly escaped the tsunami's reach by pure luck. But it doesn't mean there were no losses. The waves destroyed a nearby Inuit site, which was there untouched for over 200 years. They also swept away the huts at a research station that were about 43 miles away. The vibrations traveled from Greenland to the South Pole in less than an hour. That just shows how dangerous events like this can be. And this isn't the only place where such catastrophes are happening. In the beautiful California community of Rancho Palos Verdes, the ground is shifting so quickly that it's tearing homes apart. The land there has always been kinda unstable. It has some unique geology. It's built on soft, clay-rich soil and sits on a geological fault line, which makes it prone to landslides. This means that this land is prone to slow natural shifting over many years, even when no crazy weather is happening. It's been like this for decades, but usually it's slow and pretty manageable, like about a foot a year. Imagine a tree that you played with as a kid moving 20 feet to the left as you grow up. For decades, residents adapted. They built their homes on adjustable beams. This helped the houses to move with the land, and that strategy worked well until now. Recently, things have been getting much worse in the community. Now, the land is moving by a foot in a single week. That would be like if the same tree moved almost 960 feet since you were a child. The past 2 years have also caused some heavy rains, and the weather has been getting worse. This increased water content in the soil. The land became heavier and more prone to rapid movement. Now, this once idyllic seaside escape turned into a disaster zone. Cracks have appeared in closets, gardens, and roads, growing larger with each passing day. Streets that were once smooth are now buckled and twisted, with roads turning into a crazy theme park. Houses that once stood firm are being ripped from their foundations, some of them split in half. One of the houses had its front door 8 feet off the ground. Entire neighborhoods have been plunged into chaos. Utility companies had to switch off gas and electricity indefinitely to prevent potential disasters. The hardest hit is the coastal neighborhood of Portuguese Bend, where residents are living on the edge, literally. It always had amazing ocean views and cool sea breezes, with horses and peacocks still wandering the tree-lined streets. But now, it's like an earthquake hit. Only this time, the earth isn't stopping. For many, this place feels like paradise, if only the land would stop shifting beneath their feet. So the locals don't give up. Some of them had to leave, but many are determined to stay and fight, despite the destruction. But they still have to pour in hundreds of thousands of dollars to save their properties. People have installed generators to keep the lights on and set up sewer systems and pumps to drain the groundwater causing the landslides. Some say that the only way for these neighborhoods to survive might be to go completely off-grid, installing power walls to store energy and stuff like that. People are trying their best to run the sewer system off generators. They hope that they could get rid of this water in the soil that's causing these hellish landslides in the first place. They're determined to fight, but they will need help and support from the government to fight this disaster. Landslides are actually more common across the US than many might think. And new maps and data show that tons of people in the country might be in danger. Scientists managed to create the first very detailed, very cool map that shows where these landslides might happen, county by county. It's based on a lot of data and the history of 1 million previous landslides. They say that nearly 40% of the United States is at risk of experiencing landslide activity, which could lead to some insane catastrophes in certain areas. Luckily, now both residents and engineers can keep this in mind. But all this shows how vulnerable we are to natural disasters, and how we should always stay alerted. Phew, you can finally send that last report for the day and breathe out. The weekend is around the corner. But just when you're about to hit send, you're alarmed by the low rumbling under your desk. Is it the light rail passing by? Unfortunately, that's not the case. It's a volcano speaking. What, here? In Arizona? That's right, the ground keeps shifting under Arizona, reminding us that Earth is alive. No panic though, let's arm ourselves with some context. 20 American states have extinct, active, and dormant, currently sleeping, volcanoes. Among such states, you can find California, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado. On the bright side, Arizona's volcanoes are dormant at the moment, but it doesn't mean they won't go off in the near or not so near future. Now, how about traveling to Arizona to check the traces of its active volcanic past? They dot the desert landscapes of this state like spots dot a Dalmatian. There are entire volcanic fields southwest of Phoenix, east of Douglas, near Flagstaff, north of Kingman, and near the Mexico border. The most worrying thing about these fields is that even though they're not active at the moment, eruptions in this region might happen every 1,000 years or so. Well, the time seems to be up. The last powerful and destructive volcanic eruption occurred around 1,000 years ago at the Sunset Crater. Oh, this place is worth paying more attention to. And we will, but a bit later. First, we have to talk about hotspots. No, not that place where you can surf the web. In our volcanic context, a hotspot is a place where insane amounts of heat melt the overlying crust, Earth's thin outer layer, and form volcanoes. This heat rises from the mantle, which is located between our planet's dense, superheated core and the crust. Want to see an example of this type of volcanism? Welcome to the Hawaiian Islands. The Big Island has its active volcanoes because, at the moment, it's situated on top of the Hawaiian hotspot. The older Hawaiian Islands were once there too, but later they drifted off towards the northwest. It happened because that's where the oceanic crust on top of which they sat, namely the Pacific Plate, moved. Now, look at the world's ocean basins. Yes, they're literally dotted with islands that sit on top of hotspots, like Hawaii, Iceland, Samoa, the Galapagos. Those are probably the most famous examples. But don't think that continents can't host hotspots. They can, but those are far less common. One of the most famous continental hotspots is, I bet you know it. Yep, the one beneath the Yellowstone caldera. By the way, the caldera is a vast volcanic crater, especially one formed as a result of a massive eruption that led to the collapse of the mouth of a volcano. The Yellowstone hotspot is basically the creator of Old Faithful and the rest of the hot springs and mud pots for which the national park is famous. Speaking of Old Faithful, let's make a small detour and pay more attention to this wonder of nature. It's one of the most well-known geysers in the world. People have been coming from all over the globe to see it for more than a century. The cool thing about this geyser is that the likes of it can only form under very specific conditions. That's why they're pretty rare. Magma under the surface superheats pockets of underground water. The pressure there keeps growing until it eventually pushes the water upward with immense strength. A certain volcanic rock with a high silica content lines the tunnel through which this water escapes. Basically, it creates a unique pipe that can withstand unbelievable pressure and heat created by the water erupting above the ground. Old Faithful was the very first named geyser in Yellowstone. If you come to visit it expecting the thing to erupt every hour on the hour, you're gonna be disappointed. On average, Old Faithful erupts every 91 minutes or so, which isn't that bad either. Plus, you can download a special app which will provide you with the approximate time of the next eruption. But be very careful while visiting and stay away from the site. The water erupting from the powerful geyser reaches 204 degrees Fahrenheit. The steam is even more scorching, up to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. It's hot enough to bake a cake. But let's get back to our volcanic hotspots. Scientists still don't clearly understand why there aren't many hotspot volcanoes on continental crust. One reason might be that the continental crust is much thicker than the oceanic crust, which is about 4 times as thick on average. Another reason could be that most of Earth's crust, about 2/3 of it, is oceanic. This means that there's less continental crust for hotspots to form under. Now, I bet those of you living in Arizona will appreciate the following info. We'll talk about a volcanic field right in the heart of this state, the San Francisco Volcanic Field. That's a massive area filled with over 600 volcanoes. Yes, they're mostly small, but it doesn't make them any less impressive. They're scattered across 1,800 square miles in northern Arizona, a giant territory. Interestingly, scientists are still debating about whether this volcanic field is actually sitting on top of a hotspot. But one thing they agree upon, the volcanoes in this area get younger as you move east. And this pattern matches up with the North American plate moving west over what could be a stationary hotspot beneath the surface of our planet. Cool, huh? The volcanic hullabaloo in that area started around 6 million years ago. So, in geological terms, it's relatively young. As for the most recent eruption, it happened less than 1,000 years ago. The Sunset Crater, which I mentioned before, the one near Flagstaff, is the most famous vent from that eruption. The Sinagua people had to leave their homes at Wupatki Pueblo because of the eruption. That site is now part of the Wupatki National Monument. There, you can see how people lived in this volcanic region many years ago. If you go to explore this area, you'll notice that most of the volcanoes there are basalt cinder cones, small and steep. The Colorado Plateau has quite dry weather conditions. That's why the volcanoes haven't worn down much. Some of the best examples of those cones, like this one, called the SP crater, still look like they appeared yesterday. But look around. It's not just cinder cones. The San Francisco Volcanic Field also has a stratovolcano, as well as some lava domes that formed from volcanic rocks with more silica than basalt you can find in places like Hawaii. It means they're thicker and don't flow as easily. Anyway, the stratovolcano is going to be one of the most epic sights you'll come across while exploring this volcanic field. Well, not the stratovolcano itself, but the San Francisco peaks, the remains of that giant formation. They stand tall at more than 12,600 feet. That's 4.5 Burj Khalifas placed on top of one another. It makes the peaks some of the biggest landmarks in northern Arizona. They're not only stunning, but also sacred to the Native American people who have lived in the area for many generations. Now, unlike those super active volcanoes in Hawaii, the San Francisco Volcanic Field takes its time, thousands of years between eruptions. But you shouldn't relax just yet. Geologists say another eruption is likely to happen one day. It will probably occur in the remote eastern part of the field, away from big towns. Phew! And if that next eruption is anything like the one that formed Sunset Crater, it would be quite the show. Lava fountains and rivers of lava flowing. At the same time, the next eruption might not happen for centuries, maybe even millennia. Until then, The San Francisco volcanic field will remain a hidden gem of volcanic history, waiting for its next fiery performance. At this very moment, scientists are getting ready to explore the Earth's deepest layers, where temperatures are insanely high and the pressure is crushing. It might sound like a plot from Journey to the Center of the Earth, but it's for real. By 2026, the Krafla Magma Testbed Project plans to drill into an active volcano in Iceland. Their goal is to search for magma. Yep, that boiling molten rock that we often associate with destruction. It is a high-risk mission and a huge technical challenge, but the payoff can transform our future. This isn't our first attempt to journey to the center of the Earth. Back in 1959, Hawaii witnessed a breathtaking spectacle as red-hot lava violently erupted from 400-foot Kilauea Iki crater. Over the next 5 weeks, lava fountains erupted in 17 major bursts, with the tallest reaching a record 1,900 feet. This spectacular and terrifying event left behind a glowing lava lake in the crater. A few months after the eruption, the lava began cooling and forming crusts. That was a perfect chance for scientists to drill into that lake, see what was going on beneath it, and collect data about the magma reservoir. Over the next 2 decades, they kept coming back, digging a little deeper each time. By 1979, they managed to get 173 feet down. Up to that point, it was the closest we had ever come to an actual magma chamber. And by that, I mean the underground pool where magma sits before eventually rising to the surface and causing a volcanic eruption. Decades later, the dream of reaching magma finally became a reality. We are now in Iceland in the year 2009. The Iceland Deep Drilling Project has just kicked off. Their goal is to transform the Earth's inner heat into clean energy for everyday needs, such as heating homes and supplying hot water for baths. You see, using heat from the Earth's interior to make energy isn't new, but it usually comes from hot water underground, not directly from a freaking scorching magma chamber. That's why the Iceland Deep Drilling Project was such a big deal. Magma could be a clean, renewable power source. And since it's hotter than the geothermal energy we normally use, it could generate a lot more power. Iceland is a natural choice for this kind of project. Known as the land of fire and ice, this country is home to some of the most active volcanoes on the planet. One of the most popular ones is Krafla, a volcanic caldera of about 6 miles in diameter, located north of the island. So, the initial plan of the Iceland Deep Drilling Project was to go there and excavate 13,000 feet deep. But something unexpected happened. When they were only 6,900 feet down, the drill hit magma. Wow! On one hand, it was exciting, because, well, we finally found it. And just like that, Krafla became the first place in the world where we know exactly where magma is. But on the other hand, their equipment wasn't prepared or built for it, and the molten rock basically corroded their infrastructure, bringing the project to an end. Instead of being a failure, this accidental discovery gave us a ton of valuable data. We realized that, with the right equipment, drilling in such extreme heat is definitely possible. Scientists found that these underground molten pools can in fact produce a significant amount of geothermal energy. And most importantly, we learned exactly where the magma was. That brings us to the current Krafla Magma Testbed Project. This scientific program aims to create the world's first magma center. The idea is to set up a base where scientists can safely work with magma and have all the necessary infrastructure to run experiments on volcanic risks and geothermal energy. So that's like the basic idea. But their real plan is to return to Krafla, drill back into it, and create a gateway to the magma chamber. The goal is to understand its potential for generating energy, study its properties, and see if we can use it safely and efficiently. If they pull this off, it could provide a nearly endless source of geothermal energy for Iceland's homes and buildings. Even though magma is incredibly hot, reaching over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, experts say it is safe to take energy from it and believe the process won't trigger another volcanic eruption in the country. They're so sure about this, partly thanks to the Iceland Deep Drilling Project. But this whole process isn't like drilling for oil or gas. It's way more challenging and risky. Magma is not just extremely hot, it's molten rock, which can wreck equipment and pose serious safety issues. Right now, the Krafla Magma Testbed project is in its early stages. Scientists and engineers are working hard to develop the tech needed to drill into magma safely. They're testing new drilling techniques, creating heat-resistant materials, and running simulations to figure out what happens when you actually drill into a magma chamber. They hope that by 2026 they will be ready for the next step, which means going back to Krafla and drilling all the way down towards the magma chamber. It might take 2 months to reach it. Their plan is to drill a single hole that will go right into the magma body and hopefully keep the equipment running there for many years. If they succeed, scientists also plan to add special sensors down there to measure and monitor pressure. This could help predict eruptions better and prevent disasters, like what happened with Mount St. Helens in the United States. In 1980, this volcano erupted, causing massive destruction and claiming over 50 lives. The eruption was so intense that it completely blacked out sunlight in Spokane, Washington, which is about 250 miles away. While that sounds terrifying, it's nothing compared to a super eruption, like the one that happened over 70,000 years ago at Toba volcano in Indonesia. This disaster was about 1,000 times more powerful than Mount St. Helens. Toba is just one of the 20 supervolcanoes on Earth. A supervolcano is what people call a volcano that can produce an eruption of magnitude 8. These eruptions, known as super eruptions, are the largest and most explosive ones. They could have global consequences by affecting the climate and causing widespread destruction. For example, if Yellowstone had a super eruption today, the surrounding states of Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana would be directly affected. They could be hit by hot avalanches of volcanic ash, gases, and rocks that might reach temperatures of up to 932 degrees Fahrenheit and speeds of over 180 miles per hour. This nightmarish scenario is a real possibility, but predicting when it might happen is almost impossible. Volcanoes don't follow a precise schedule, so it is hard to predict when a supervolcano will erupt next. That is also why the Krafla Magma Testbed is so crucial. By examining a volcano's activity from within, scientists could potentially predict eruptions with much more accuracy. As you might have guessed, drilling into magma is definitely uncharted territory, but the potential benefits are huge. Besides providing a clean energy source and making people who live near volcanoes feel safer, this project might also help us learn more about what is beyond Earth. Yep, it could lead us to breakthroughs in space exploration, helping us understand how other rocky planets and moons formed their crust, just like Jupiter's moon Io, which is the most volcanically active world in our solar system. In the end, the Krafla Magma Testbed project is more than just an experiment. It is a bold vision for the future of energy. It's about pushing the boundaries of science and engineering, taking risks, and dreaming big. So we should definitely keep an eye on Krafla, because this adventure into the fiery depths of our planet could end up changing our future.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side. Recently, scientists have made an astounding discovery that can change the entire course of Mars exploration. Apparently, there are oceans of liquid water on the red planet, so the future looks bright. We could use this water to support future missions, and then even relocate to Mars, since we wouldn't need to worry about where to get this precious liquid, right? Well, there's one big problem. These oceans of liquid water are in Mars, so deep inside that we aren't likely to get there. At least that's what a new analysis of seismic data collected by the Mars Insight Lander claims. Huge reserves of liquid water seem to be the best explanation for some seismic quirks of the red planet. So all this precious water is out of our reach. But we need to find it to solve the puzzle of the aquatic history of our blushing, dusty neighbor. And the first thing we need to do is identify where the water is and how much of it the planet is hiding.
Navigation has confirmed that the parachute has deployed and we are seeing significant deceleration.
Now, our rovers are scurrying about on the surface of the red planet, gathering all the available data on the planet's surface geology. And it's getting increasingly obvious that Mars was once covered with water. Many factors, from Martian terrains to ancient dry lake beds and deltas, suggest that there was a time when the planet was quite soppy. These days, there's still some water on and right below the surface of Mars, but it's in the form of ice and nowhere near what Mars had in the ancient past. To understand how much of it could have been on the red planet billions of years ago, we must know where all this water went. There are two spots where the water could have gone: into space or toward the interior of Mars. Then it could have been isolated as either liquid reservoirs or ice deposits. Currently, we don't have any way of measuring how much water once leaked away. But now, we finally can find out more about the gooey center of the red planet. All thanks to the Mars Insight Lander. It isn't operating anymore, but from November 2018 to December 2022, it was listening to the hums and rumbles and monitoring the activity below its feet. The thing is, acoustic waves generated by seismic activity deep inside the planet can change according to the composition and density of the material these waves are moving through. And scientists can get a lot of information analyzing the behavior of seismic waves. In this case, they used a model similar to those used to map underground oil fields and aquifers on our home planet. Then, with the help of this model, they analyzed the data gathered by InSight on Mars. They discovered that the best explanation could be that there was a layer of fractured rocks whose cracks were filled with water deep under the surface of the red planet. That layer could be at a depth of 7 to 12 miles. That's why it would be extremely tricky for future missions to get to it. And still, the new discovery could help us understand the Martian water cycle. Confirming the existence of a large reservoir of liquid water can help us sneak a peek at what the climate on Mars used to be, or what it could be like one day. And if once Mars had a lot of water, it could have been habitable in the ancient past and might become habitable in the future. Water is crucial for life as we know it, so underground water reservoirs on the red planet could already be habitable. Maybe, while we're talking, tiny microorganisms or even some tentacled creatures are living their lives in the comfort of their underground home. On Earth, super deep mines do host life, and the bottom of the ocean, with its immense unbelievable pressures, isn't lifeless either. So far, we haven't found any evidence of life on Mars, but for now, it sounds like this place has the potential to sustain life. InSight data has shown that there isn't likely to be a lot of water ice in the upper crust of the planet, at least in the region around the lander. But if it turns out that there is a water-rich layer deep below the surface and stretching around the entire globe of the planet, then there would be enough water to fill ancient ocean beds and even more. Now, Mars isn't the only place outside Earth where there is water or where we might one day find water. Take the good old Moon, for example. On Earth's natural satellite, water can be found all over the surface, but it's not the water you might be imagining. On the Moon, water remains mostly as ice, and it's distributed unevenly. For example, the poles of the Moon are the regions that never receive sunlight. This is the reason they're extremely cold, and it's no wonder there's a lot of ice there. The ice in these areas is often mixed with the lunar soil and hiding deep below the surface. Then there's Enceladus, the sixth largest moon of Saturn. In reality, it's not that large, just 314 miles across. In other words, this moon is small enough to fit inside Arizona. Ooh, we should try that. Well, interestingly, when the Cassini space probe first arrived at Saturn, researchers were expecting Enceladus to be a frozen ball of ice. But what they saw was plumes of icy particles and water vapor erupting from geysers on the Moon's surface. It was clear that there was a massive ocean between the Moon's rocky core and its icy shell. Then there's Jupiter's moon Europa. Scientists think that this world is one of the most promising places in the solar system when it comes to searching for new life forms. That's because Europa has a huge saltwater ocean as deep as 40 to 100 miles. And even though it's under a layer of ice that is likely to be 10 to 20 miles thick, it's still potentially habitable. Astronomers believe that plumes of water might erupt from cracks in the ice shell and release the contents of the Moon's ocean into space. The temperature, pressure, and chemistry are very different on Europa, and astronomers aren't sure yet how the ice behaves there. That's the main reason they haven't figured out yet how deep or large the water reservoirs on Europa are and how long they need to refreeze. But out of all the places where we could find water in the universe, the most bizarre is probably open space. In 2011, 2 teams of astronomers discovered a cloud of water floating freely among stars. It was the largest and farthest reservoir of water ever detected. So this massive cloud of water vapor surrounds a black hole. But not just any black hole. This one's a quasar, located 12 billion light-years from Earth. The conditions around this quasar must be really special to create such an enormous amount of water. This cloud contains 140 trillion times the volume of all the water on Earth. That's enough to give every person on the planet a whole planet's worth of water 20,000 times over. Sounds wild, doesn't it? But there's something even cooler. Astronomers think this water cloud formed just 1.6 billion years after the universe began. This discovery is yet another sign that water has been around all over the universe, even in its early days. But here's the kicker. Until they found this, scientists had never detected water vapor so far back in time. Sure, there's water in our Milky Way galaxy, but most of it's frozen solid in ice. This discovery really pushes the boundaries of what we know about water in the universe. So, a mysterious discovery was made deep in the Red Sea, the so-called death pools. Woo, that's scary. In 2020, researchers embarked on a dive into the Red Sea. The mission spot was in the Gulf of Aqaba, between Saudi Arabia and Egypt. Near the end of their expedition, as they ventured deeper into the darkening waters, they noticed some strange seaweed floating above the seafloor. They decided to use a remotely operated vehicle and investigate it. Suddenly, they discovered these strange, motionless lakes of water within the sea. These are called brine pools. They're basically pockets of salty water deep on the ocean floor. And when I say salty, I mean it. Sometimes they're up to 8 times saltier than the ocean water itself. Mysteriously, they don't mix well with the surroundings. They formed millions of years ago, sometime during the Miocene epoch, back when weird creatures roamed the Earth, like me, and deeply buried mineral deposits dissolved into the water. The largest pool spans about 170,000 square feet. Meanwhile, 3 smaller ones are under 107 square feet each. At first, this discovery didn't seem that scary. But here's why they're so horrifying. Not only are they disgustingly salty, they also lack oxygen. Now hold on a sec, isn't that normal for something that's underwater? Well, it turns out the Earth's waters are full of oxygen, and at least half of this element on our planet comes from the oceans. Just like plants on land, marine plants such as phytoplankton, seaweed, and algae munch on sunlight and produce oxygen through photosynthesis. They release lots of it into the surroundings. Marine life then eats half of it, so only about a quarter of the oxygen that we breathe actually comes from the oceans. Just like us, sea creatures need this element to survive. Without it, they can't breathe and support their metabolism to live. That's why these pools are super dangerous for most of them. It's like a puddle of thick syrup for bugs. When they get in, the poor things immediately suffocate and pass away. Which is why the pools are surrounded by a graveyard of marine animals. But let's see how these things can exist in the first place. Have you ever tried making ice cubes from salty water? Spoiler, it's pretty hard. When you add salt, the water gets harder than usual to freeze, a phenomenon that has a funny name – freezing point depression. Oh, that's because salt interferes with the hydrogen bonds between water molecules. As it finally freezes, stuff like particles, dirt, or dissolved salts get pushed out to the sides. As a result, the salt's kind of squeezed out of the ice crystals and gets trapped near the edges in small bubbles or pockets. Something similar happens in the ocean when seawater starts freezing under super cold polar caps. The salt doesn't freeze with the water. Instead, it gets pushed out, forming a super salty cold liquid, the brine. And then it sinks down to the ocean floor. On a large scale, all this process also helps currents to form. Despite being so dangerous, the pools are still full of microbial life because microbes couldn't care less, they'll survive anywhere. There are literally thick mats of them in the brines. There are also some salt-loving creatures, like shrimps and eels, hovering around the pool's edges. They're being super creepy, waiting to catch unsuspecting prey that ventures too close to the toxic death pool. Ew. Well, it sounds icky, I know. But this discovery gives us some fascinating insights into how life might have originated on Earth. We already know from the evolution theory that we came from the ocean, but now scientists think that life might have begun in the deep sea in some super dark, oxygen-free places. These brine pools are like time capsules. They're one of the closest things we found to the early Earth. They can tell us the planet's history of earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, and more. For example, they have some traces of rainfall that happened over 1,000 years ago. And they can also help us search for life on other water-rich planets. For example, Mars most likely used to have huge oceans on it. Now, NASA scientists want to send a special instrument called HABIT for a special red planet mission to study things similar to our brine pools. This will tell us more about how life appears and survives in the universe. There is lots of unexplored fascinating stuff like this in the Red Sea. That's why scientists conducted the so-called Decade Expedition and spent around 5 months exploring the place. This expedition was launched by the National Center for Wildlife. They made so many remarkable discoveries that now we've got 77 new research papers. For example, they found over 10 blue holes, incredible underwater sinkholes that host unique ecosystems. They also learned that dolphins can use those blue holes to protect their young from predators. Scientists also found traces of great white sharks, a creepy community of deep-sea lanternfish living in low oxygen conditions, and even a new coral species. It's the most resilient deep-sea corals that also vibe just fine without oxygen, like microbes we mentioned. Speaking of which, research also showed us some new ancient thermal vents and large blobs of microbial formations near Parisian Island. Now, can you believe that with all that, we only explored 5% of the ocean? It's divided into several layers based on depth. Each layer becomes darker and more isolated from sunlight as we go deeper. The places that no sunlight can reach are terrifying. Now, the fun, cute layer with dolphins and turtles is called the epipelagic or sunlight zone. It's so tiny, but even this layer is about 650 feet deep. Then we have the mesopelagic or twilight zone. It's the layer of mysterious octopus, shark, and other loners which extend to about 3,000 feet down. And then the horrors begin after this one. We encounter the bathypelagic or midnight zone. It extends to 13,000 feet below the surface, about a half of Everest above you. Here we have the famous poor blobfish, squids, and anglerfish. Below it is the abyssal zone. It extends to about 20,000 feet deep. Since there's not much sunlight or oxygen, as we mentioned, most creatures here are quite small, like tube worms and shrimp. The darkness continues until we arrive at the scariest place of the planet, the place full of trenches formed by tectonic plate movements, the Hadal Zone. It's named after Hades, the deity of the underworld in Greek mythology. Just like Hades' realm is dark, remote, and guarded, the Hadal Zone is the deepest and most depressing part of the ocean. It starts at depths of around 20,000 feet and can go down to 36,000 feet and more. The famous Mariana Trench also belongs to this zone. Only 3 people in history have ever explored these depths in person, making it one of the least explored and most mysterious places on our planet. However, despite crazy high pressure, near freezing temperatures, and complete darkness, there are still things who manage to survive here. Guys like amphipods, which are critters who feed on dead material sinking from above, and the hadal snailfish, which lives as deep as 27,000 feet. So scientists used to assume that if there's no sunlight, there wouldn't be that much oxygen around. But one day, a research team decided to measure the levels of oxygen in one of those deep zones. Surprisingly, the levels were super high. They checked the equipment thinking that it was malfunctioning, but nope, all the sensors showed the same thing. Turns out the oxygen was somehow generated by rocks. These small potato-sized rocks on the seafloor are called polymetallic nodules. They're rich in metals like copper, nickel, and cobalt, and they're basically like small batteries. When you put a battery in salt water, it can produce bubbles of gas, a process called electrolysis. In the same way, these rocks create tiny electric currents, which are powerful enough to produce the same gases, splitting water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. It's the first time we saw oxygen being produced by some non-living minerals. This is what scientists now call dark oxygen. It turned out that about half of large marine species, or megafauna, were living just on dark oxygen alone. All these discoveries are reshaping our understanding of where and how life could evolve. It means that we might be able to find life on other planets or satellites with low oxygen conditions, like Enceladus and Europa, the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and they have large bodies of frozen water on them. Wow! Most people know that pyramids were built as grand tombs for the pharaohs, designed to ensure they had a smooth journey to the afterlife. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, was constructed for the pharaoh Khufu. But what most people don't know is that this whole pyramid building trend started right here, with the step pyramid of Djoser, about 4,700 years ago. This massive structure was built for Pharaoh Djoser, a ruler from Egypt's 3rd dynasty. It rises 7 layers high above the ground and stands about 200 feet tall. We think of it today as a phenomenal architectural project, but for ancient Egyptians, the step pyramid of Djoser turned out to be more like a massive experiment, a trial run, if you will, to perfect their building skills before they moved on to even more ambitious pyramids. Reaching new heights is super exciting, but the real mystery is what is going on below the ground. In this pyramid's underground labyrinth, there is a network of tunnels stretching about 3.5 miles long, and some researchers believe these tunnels might have been part of a sophisticated water system that could completely change what we think about pyramid construction. Let's talk about this massive complex located in Saqqara. Surrounding the pyramid, there's what's known as a dry moat, a continuous trench that is up to 164 feet wide and almost 2 miles long. It forms a sort of rectangular shape around the pyramid. This trench has an average depth of about 65 feet. Now, if you were to add up all the earth and rock they dug out to create this moat, it would be about 10 times the volume of the step pyramid itself. For the longest time, people just assumed this trench was nothing more than a huge quarry, a place where they dug up stone and clay to build the step pyramid. Makes sense, right? But when you take a closer look, it doesn't add up. The trench is too narrow and deep to be practical for mining, and its layout doesn't match anything we know about ancient Egyptian quarrying methods. Plus, some sections of the trench are actually covered with a rocky ceiling, which would have made it nearly impossible to use as a quarry. Another theory suggests that the dry moat had some kind of spiritual significance. Maybe it was a sacred place, where souls of nobles gathered to serve the late king in the afterlife. There are even niches in the walls that work as a hint at this spiritual function. But most researchers believe that this purpose likely developed much later, long after the complex was built for Djoser. So what was the moat really designed for? In 2020, a researcher came up with a pretty intriguing idea. It is possible that this trench was actually designed to collect and manage water, especially after heavy rainfalls. Now, that makes sense when you consider the location. The moat sits in an area that could easily have been flooded by runoff water from nearby plains. This could also explain why the trench wasn't used for new graves until much later when the climate became drier and less prone to flooding. The story becomes even more intriguing as this trench appears to be part of a larger, more complex hydraulic system within the Djoser complex. It is like the trench has several compartments, carefully carved out of the rock and connected by tunnels. These compartments likely served as a part of a water treatment system, where water would flow from one compartment to the next, getting cleaner as it moved along. Now, here is where things start to tie into the pyramid itself. The Djoser complex has a series of underground shafts, and some researchers think that water from the moat's deep trench might have been used to power a hydraulic lift system, and this giant water-powered elevator could have been used to raise the heavy stones needed to build the pyramid. It worked like a volcano, but instead of lava, water did the heavy lifting. Imagine a big deep hole in the ground at the center of the pyramid site. Inside this hole, there was a huge wooden platform, kind of like a giant raft that could move up and down. When the workers wanted to lift a heavy stone, they would fill the hole with water. As the water rose, the wooden platform started to float up, carrying the stone with it, almost like a giant water-powered elevator. When the stone reached the right height, the workers slid it off the platform and onto the pyramid. The idea is that water from the deep trench, after being cleaned and filtered, would flow into these shafts. A massive float, possibly made of wood, would then rise as the water filled the shaft, lifting the stones up to where they were needed for construction. Once the stone was in place, they'd let the water out, lowering the platform back down to the bottom, ready to lift the next stone. This fancy hydraulic lift system could have been a game changer, making the whole building process a lot faster and more efficient without using a lot of workforce. It is like the ancient Egyptians were already embracing the whole idea of work smarter, not harder. But of course, not everyone is on board with this theory. Some experts argue that the area where the step pyramid of Djoser was built couldn't have held enough water from occasional rains to maintain such a fancy hydraulic system. The main theory suggests that, in the past, there might have been some kind of lake nearby that would have filled up after a period of rain, and this lake could have supplied water to the complex's hydraulic system. But there is no mention of such a lake in any ancient Egyptian writings, so it might be more of a what-if situation than a reality. And then there's the issue of the hard work itself. Remember when I said this method could have allowed the ancient builders to raise stones with far less effort? Well, that might not be entirely true. According to some experts, just building this hydraulic device would have required a lot more heavy work than simply moving the stone blocks using good old-fashioned manpower. And let's not forget, the step pyramid of Djoser is like a baby pyramid compared to those that came later. The stones used for Djoser's pyramid weighed, on average, about 660 pounds each, which is nothing compared to the more than 2.5-ton blocks used later for the pyramid of Chephren. If this cool water lift theory gets completely ruled out, we still need to explain how this pyramid was built in the first place. To answer that, we need to rewind a bit and talk about the original plans. See, before Djoser's tomb became a pyramid, the idea was to construct a simple mastaba. This type of tomb was pretty common in earlier periods, a flat-roofed, rectangular structure with sloping sides. But after the original mastaba was finished, they decided to expand it a bit by adding more layers on top. And then they added even more layers, until the construction reached 6 distinctive steps, each one smaller than the previous. And they probably did all this by raising those heavy stones using ramps, not a water-powered elevator. There is still so much we don't know about the step pyramid of Djoser. More research is definitely needed to fully understand how this system worked, or if it even existed at all. But the idea of using water to help build the pyramid adds a whole new layer to our understanding of ancient Egyptian engineering. It's a powerful reminder of just how clever and resourceful those builders were, using the natural landscape and the power of water to create one of the most iconic monuments in history. That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos